Yeah, ready to start our class? Welcome everyone. I am Cynthia Zaid and I'm the National Program Chair for the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. I'm also this region's Activities Programs Chair. Thank you so much for coming. I welcome those of you in the audience, some of you coming from Chico, 3 hours away, some from Santa Rosa, and myself, I came from Sacramento this morning. And I also want to welcome everybody who's online from all over the country, all of you NATAS and IBEW members. Thank you very much to IBEW for partnering with us on this series of master classes. Today is our second master class, which will be focusing on writing and storytelling with our wonderful master, 51 Emmys, Wayne Freedman. Just a couple of things before we start. I also want to thank KGO and Wayne as well for doing this today with us. What we're going to do is we're dividing this 2.5-hour class into 3 segments. We're going to take about a 10-minute break in between each segment. So you can get food, go to the bathroom, whatever you'd like to do. And we'll try to take all of your questions at the end of each segment. So just raise your hand if you have a question. And we have a mic at the front of the table there that you can come up to and use if you have a question. And those of you out there in Cyberland, I will be moderating the webcast and will be taking questions from you live online. So if you have a question, please also type in your name and where you're located and then your question. And Wayne will take your questions as he has time and definitely at the end of each segment. That's about it. So without further ado, Wayne.
Hey. Hi, everybody. Thank goodness there's an audience in the room. Because to do this on a live, I've never done a live webcast before, and to wonder who's out there and who's listening and what you might want to hear is a little strange. So we have some people reacting, well, a few of you. Those of you who don't know who I am, I guess I'm a dinosaur at this point. I'm a 60-year-old guy who's been a reporter in one form or another since I was 14 years old. My first written effort, luckily enough, appeared as a column in what is now the LA Daily News in Los Angeles, and it went all the way through high school. And it was basically a column about life in high school. So I started writing about life early on and was lucky to get feedback and mentoring early on. But I've been a TV reporter. I don't know where you start. I've been working in newsrooms since 1974. I've been a reporter, I guess, since 1977, 1978. I've been in San Francisco since 1981. Had a stint at CBS News in between, but mostly I've been in this market for a very long time, long enough to have what they call institutional history. You might wonder how a guy like me is still working, looking like this at age 60. And the answer is, I don't know, except maybe people tell me that I kind of know how to tell a story. And maybe I know how to tell a story because I have a lazy mind and I'm not all that good with a million facts. But I'm really not bad at taking a look at what the facts mean. And people say they like what I do because they relate to the pieces. I can tell you, this seminar is supposed to go, what, 2.5 hours today in 3 sessions? I mean, I can tell you what you need to know in 2 minutes, really. I mean, the rest is just the details of what you need to know. When I talk about storytelling, I'm really talking about reporting, I'm talking about the news, I'm talking about facts, I'm talking about context. But at the bottom of all that, I'm really talking about narrative storytelling, a narrative, stuff with a beginning, a middle, and end. If I'm still on television in this market, I have survived by adapting and changing. But the one thing that never changes would be the elements of a good story. So let me begin. There's going to be a lot of video today, because you don't want to look at me. And frankly, I don't want to look at this webcast and look at me. I got enough of it in the mirror. But I'm going to begin with a clip that a friend of mine did named Deirdre Lynch. And she was doing a documentary about a photo trip, Dorothea Lange, you may remember, a fine photographer, who went to Ireland for Life magazine. And she was Irish, of Irish descent. And she decided to follow Dorothea Lange's footsteps and do a documentary. And in that documentary, there's a short little clip. It's maybe 40 seconds. It's maybe 4 shots. There's not a single bit of narration, but it actually has all the elements of a good narrative story. So let's begin by showing you this, and then we'll talk about that, okay? Let's hope this video runs off this machine.
Tiny? Tiny? Come on. Tiny. Come on. Tiny?
Okay, anybody in this room want to venture as to why that might have worked? Did it work? Did it work? You guys can speak up, it's okay. Did it work? You're nodding. Okay. Did you get involved in that? Did you kind of forget you were at a seminar for a minute?
Yes.
Did you suddenly care about that thing?
Yes.
Can you analyze why it worked? What did it have that made it work?
It held your attention.
It held your attention, but why? What was it? Let's, right, you're concerned about the animal getting hit. It had all the elements of a narrative story. It had a beginning, it had a scene set, right? It had the woman's voice. It had an introduction of a character, the dog. It had the other character who you never see on camera till the end. It had tension, which makes you want to see what happened. And it had resolution. Those are the four basic elements. Now look, I'm a news guy. Some of you aren't news people, but I'm telling you that if you want people to watch a story or a program or a session, you got to give them a reason to watch, a reason to care, a reason to stick around. They want to see how it turns out. Why do you think Breaking Bad was such a successful television show? We got involved with those guys, right? We wanted to know what Walter was going to do next. We watched Walter change from a nice chemistry teacher to what he turned into. So there's an evolution there. That is a basic and simple narrative. Now, as I talk to you, I'm going to go to my next clip, so bear with me. Tiny was an interesting main character, and main characters are kind of crucial because they're the glue. Let me ask you, just out of curiosity, and think about this at home as well. Can you remember the last time you passed an auto accident on the road or on the freeway? Do you remember it? How much of it do you remember? Do you remember the kind of car it was? Do you remember the intersection? Do you remember anything about it? I hate to tell you this, but that's the way people, your audience, watches the news. They kind of watch this stuff pass by on the screen. If they're not compelled, it doesn't stick. So you got to find a way to make a story stick. You want to get their attention. Now, if you had passed that car wreck and you recognized it as being just like your car, or like a car that belonged to a friend of yours, or maybe something, maybe even your wife's, or if you knew that person, then you would care. And that's what we need to do in a television news story. We need to make people care. I've been doing sessions like this since 1985. And I hate repeating myself, but darn it, sometimes you got to repeat yourself. It's journalism 101. News is people. Most of the time, it's a character in a story. Now, sometimes that person may be the viewer. If you're going to tell me that an asteroid is coming to Earth and it's going to hit, I do not want to know what Joe the barber thinks. The main character in that story is you. But a lot of times, you're going to talk to somebody else. So you need to find good, compelling characters. I'm going to show you a piece that, oddly enough, I don't think I've ever shown in a session before, and it's actually fairly old. I did this piece back in 1991, right after I left CBS News and came to KGO. And let's see if this opens up. And I don't think you're ever going to find two characters who are more interesting or compelling than these guys.
It's a hot, brutal sun in these dog days of August. Like a furnace, it bakes the land. Like a hammer, it beats down on the men and beasts who work that land.
Come up. Oh boy. All right, way back, way back.
In the ranching business near Woodland, men have always used dogs to keep the herds together. And when a man and dog labor long enough, say 11 years or so, they form a relationship like the one Don McCreary shares with Perry.
He's just one of those swim the river with kind of individuals that, by golly, if you got to put a crew together and to get a job done, that's the kind of dog that you want, because you make a living with that cuss.
Don and Perry are partners, the best of friends. Not only do they work together, but when the day ends, they play together too. It's Friday night in Don's 30 and over Roy Hobbs Baseball League. As usual, he's in center field and Perry's behind home plate. Please don't take his seat.
If you sit down there, he'll just jump right over you.
He's a baseball fanatic.
Right there, all right, all right.
Perry's a cross between McNabb and Kelty, a mix that gives him exceptionally sharp eyes and a stalking stare.
A natural extension of their working instinct to follow that stick, to follow that frisbee, to follow that ball. He says. Then back off between pitches, and as the pitcher winds up again, he just drops down in again. He's ready to go with the pitch, whichever it goes.
There's a continuing debate here about how much Perry really knows. Does he count balls and strikes? Does he really know the score? Some people think he's an old ball player reincarnated.
Umpire Dave Mendez thinks Perry is really Babe Ruth. He says one play really convinced him.
I've got a close play at the plate, and I make the call, and it's against his team, and I ring the guy up, and the dog, woo, 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 and it starts barking at me like a player, like a fan, and it's up there watching the play, and, you know, I called time, and I looked back, and I can't believe it. There's this dog, watched the whole play, saw the call, didn't like it, let me know, and went back and sat down.
So Perry watched the game, and we watched Perry. Like any other fan, when his team fell behind, his interest faded. But later, when Don's team won with a grand slam in the bottom of the seventh, well, the game doesn't get much better.
Well done, well done.
Baseball, it's a way of life out here. You work hard, you play hard.
Yeah, well, at least I was 1 for 3. I know I didn't steal any bases, but I'm an old guy. I'm slowing down all the time.
These may indeed be the dog days of August.
We don't always win them, but we're over 500 now.
But this dog's day is not complete without his master and a night game.
Come on, old dog. Let's go home.
Near Woodland, Wayne Freedman, Channel 7 News.
Interesting story. Couple of points I want to make. First of all, not every story I'm going to show you is a dog story today. It just happened that way, okay? Secondly, you know that guy with all the hair on his head there? When that was taken, I thought I was bald. The truth is, I still have that hairline, which you look at today is really a fashion statement. I could still wear my hair long and comb back. I still have hair, really do. But I just don't want to comb it anymore. So, did you notice how in that story a lot happened? I'm going to talk to you later today about timelines. Remember that one, because that was what we would call a linear timeline. I'm kind of giving you a little information in advance. A linear timeline is a story that begins at the beginning and ends at the ending, and it's a complete straight line. And there's no variation, there's no fluctuation. We're going to talk about timelines later, but remember that part. But did you see how the piece kept moving forward? How you sort of had questions, how you wondered where it was going, and then it goes to the next part, and the next part, and the next part, and nothing ever repeats? There's no interview in the same location twice. You don't see the same thing twice. You don't see the same angle twice. Nothing repeats. That's one of the keys to telling a good, longer narrative story. Keep it moving forward, not only visually, but also editorially. Change angles, change shots, change all those things. The reality, though, is that in television news, especially these days, we don't really have the opportunity to tell stories that well very often. Most of the time we're banging along and turning one story, if not two stories, if maybe 3 stories in a day. As I talk to you, I'm looking for my next piece, so bear with me here. So sometimes you got to tell them in a hurry. Usually I'm an MMJ. I like to shoot my own stories. I'm one of those guys that actually enjoys taking a camera, going out and doing it. I don't get to do it very often because of the constraints of what we do these days. It used to be, when I worked for CBS, it was 1 story a week. Even when I worked at Cron, it was maybe 2 stories a week. I came to KGO, it became maybe 1 story every 3 days. Then it became 1 story every 2 days. Then it became 1 story a day. And now, I swear, sometimes it's 15 stories a week. Usually, there are going to be 2. 2 versions of the same piece, and they can't be alike. But that's the way it is. That's reality. But I still try to tell a narrative story, a story that evolves, that takes you places, that makes you wonder, that combines all the elements, that has a character, that has a situation. Narrative stories have characters, situations, resolution. This piece here is it's about a year old. At the time, I had to convince management that this would be a good story. My boss said, well, this is so far up north, nobody's going to care that much. And I said, you know, it doesn't matter if we don't think they care, we can make them care. So this is a story about a local, well, I'm not going to tell you what it is, because if I did my job right in this piece, you'll want to see where it leads. You'll become interested in the characters, you'll be interested in the location, you'll want to know more, and we'll tell you. It's basically, though, a very fast, quick turn, MMJ story. Drove up, got it, and got it on the air.
Along River Road in Sonoma County, you'll begin reading about it from miles away. One sign leads to another, and then one more atop this strange, wrinkly, corrugated World War II military surplus Quonset hut that would seem to have no rightful place around here, until you enter the darkness and your eyes adjust and your brain takes it all in.
Well, they think it's just a rusted old Campbell's soup can laying on its side.
A soup can even Andy Warhol would have liked. Look at the walls and keep looking. It's the story of movies and California and this community.
This is 1995. The highest flood was right at the top of this line here. Right up there, that's 1986.
And maybe now you can appreciate the mixed emotions that retired firefighter Don Schaffert feels about that for sale sign sitting outside.
You don't want to sell.
I don't, but I can't figure out any other way to not to work, my wife and I, for 12 hours a day.
It's been a form of multitasking on the smallest town level. In the daytime, Don and his wife Susie run a cafe in the back.
How long you guys been married?
35
years.
Do you talk together all the time?
No.
And if other folks around here can't help the long faces once in a while, it's because the root of their problems begin 3 steps up on the 2nd floor. Welcome to the engine room of this operation, now facing an enforced obsolescence that even a skilled mechanic can't fix.
All of this goes to the garbage. It's of no use for anybody.
Have you heard about how Hollywood studios are phasing out film and forcing all theaters to buy digital projectors? They need $60,000.
That's the bottom line, it's the dollar bill. We don't generate enough dollar bills for Hollywood, so the mom and pop theater is expendable.
And this just shows where the money is.
But they're not going down without a fight. There's a Kickstarter campaign and a grassroots committee producing a musical fundraiser this Sunday. Too much at stake.
If it's gone, the town languishes.
Because the Rio isn't just the last picture show in this town. It's the last picture show for 25 miles.
Sad.
An operation so fitting for this community, so unsuited for modern times. In Monte Rio, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
Okay, so here's a question for you. Did I bury the lead in that story? Was it okay to bury the lead in that story? You set it up in the lead-in with the anchors saying movie theater in Monte Rio is facing a crisis right now. They're trying to save money to save their business. ABC 7's Wayne Freedman went up and talked to them, or whatever we would say. As a result of that story, they got their money. That felt pretty good. They got their money. That movie theater is still there. They wound up selling it anyway a few months later, but at least they had a real movie theater with real projectors and a real asset to sell. Now, did you see how, because the key word here I think is unfold and evolve. Did you see how it unfolds? I mean, you tease people along the way. But if I go back visually in this story, you know, I'm going to run it through you briefly here. We bring them in, right? We start with a soft focus shot. We sort of take you in. We're guiding you in. It's sort of like you're driving to the place. But there's some really good sequences here in terms of just taking people places. I mean, this is stuff you plan up, and you know, he's explaining it. I was lucky enough when he was standing there, he pointed to it a couple of times. He pointed to it again. That sequence worked there. But the part I liked best, and I'll show it to you again, this part here I was experimenting with. I didn't want to use a light that day as a photographer. I could have used a light, didn't want to. Just wanted to see what I could do by boosting the gain. The theory being that every time you use a light, it becomes a little more artificial. So this was an experiment. Camera needed a little more gain as it was, but I still think we got away with it. But again, that's a shot like that is what he's seeing. You don't want to just shoot the sign. You want to shoot the sign in context as he's seeing it out front. But now where the light here is red, because that was the light on the awning. Talk about the dog, just kind of lying there. But this sequence here is the heart of the story. And you notice it starts in the dark, and he climbs the stairs. I'll play it for you one more time. This is not bad here.
It's because the root of their problems begin 15 steps up on the second floor.
You still don't know what it is.
Welcome to the engine room of this operation, now facing an enforced obsolescence that even a skilled mechanic can't fix.
All of this goes to the garbage. It's of no use for anybody.
Have you heard about how Hollywood studios are phasing out film and forcing all theaters to buy digital projectors? They need $60,000.
That's the bottom line, it's the dollar bill.
Okay. See how all that went? That's an interplay. That's a dialogue between the pictures and the sound and the narration. It's not wall-to-wall words. It's sort of, you see the stuff happening, you kind of wonder where you're going. He's up the stairs, you see this thing, you think you recognize it, you're not sure. Now you got him over here, and now you're getting a better idea of what it is. But again, it's the idea that you're leading a viewer along and teasing them a little bit, but making them want to see more. Again, the key words are unfold and evolve. I mean, it's a little bit of a slow story. We got away with it. I think it was 2 minutes and 25 seconds. But it's a very good general news story for that day. And, you know, I liked it. I mean, I was able to actually get good characters, people you care about, good situation, news peg for what was happening that weekend. And the best part of it was when it was over with, the feeling that we did something good for them, right? I did that story, drove up there, shot it, interviewed them, got back, cut the thing, and helped get them the money. And our viewers responded. And that told me, you know what? This kind of stuff might just work. It might just work. They watched it, even if it wasn't 1 minute and 15 seconds. They watched it and they cared. I'm going to cue up the next piece while we talk. You guys got any questions so far? This is a good time to ask questions when I'm queuing up the next story.
A question about this story and the last one. Like, how does your access work, or how do these stories?
What's that?
So, is this on? Do I need?
I don't
this?
know.
I don't
Talk
know if I
loud.
need this. But like your level of access, as far as getting like the dog story. Oh, now it's on. And getting that past story. Like, how do these stories cross your desk?
How do I get them?
Mm-hmm.
I find them and then I beg to do them. You know, I could give you a lot on finding stories. I mean, oftentimes one story leads to another. One story leads to a question. One story leads to somebody telling you about something else, okay? Sometimes it comes off the desk and you make the best of it. I mean, a lot of times, look, we fill a lot of news at this TV station every day. We go 4 to 5, 5 to 5:30, 6 to 7. That doesn't even count the 9, the 11, or the midday, or the mornings. So we have people working pretty hard to fill that newscast. Sometimes, honestly, and of course I'm honest all the time, We're just taking their sort of half-baked ideas and making them work. You ever watch Iron Chef, the television show? Okay, you're kind of like the Iron Chef in this business. You know, they'll be given bacon and tomatoes and rutabaga and be told to make a 5-course meal. Welcome to television news. Today, our theme is, well, in the next case, it's going to be drought. Okay? You make the story with what you find. You train yourself to see what's there and respond to it and to react to it. Does that make sense? I mean, I'll find stories in newspapers not in the story, but in an aside, or in a comment, or in a mention. There's an entire chapter on that here, finding these stories. I mean, basically, you're curious. Okay, and then how do I get it past the desk? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. These days, we're so short-staffed that we pretty much have to do the hard news every day. I don't get out to do as many of these stories as I'd like. That's just the reality. But they pay me well. You know, my curse in this business is everybody knows me as a feature guy, but my curse and my blessing is that I can take any story and tell it well, and I can do it in hard news too. So I'm able to keep going. I can take a news story and do it in a narrative style, which is essentially what anybody in this room who would be a reporter, or any of you at home, is going to have to do. You're going to have to do narrative work on daily news. Tell a story about the news. You find a little story in the big one. You find small story in the large one, or a large story in the small one. Do you understand that equation? You tell me the stories about life in the stories of the news. My boss didn't want me to do that story initially. She didn't think anybody would relate. I was happy to turn around and tell her, hey, look what we did. Again, because it was a story about life in the news. It was just a small little bit. Movie theater, fundraiser, money. But look how we told it. Look how we broke it down. Look at all the things we put into it. The reality is that 90% of what we do in the news doesn't affect most of our viewers. 90% of it. Especially, a friend of mine said to me, his name is Brian Kubler. He's a very good reporter. He works in Baltimore. I think it's a WMAR. And he said to me once, he says, oh, you got it easy working in San Francisco. Everything you do is important. And I said, no, it's not. I said, working in a market this large makes it more difficult. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, because, well, maybe I have to go down to South San Francisco or to the South Bay and do a story. But we have viewers in Marin. We have viewers in the East Bay. We have viewers in Sonoma County. We have viewers 150 miles south, 150 miles north, 150 miles east. The real job here is to make those stories interesting to anybody, even if it doesn't directly affect them. I've got this theory. It's called the theory of universal appeal. If you can't make a story that doesn't matter to someone interesting to them anyway, then you're probably not going to last a very long time in this business. Universal appeal. Narrative stories have universal appeal. You're going to want stories with universal appeal when you apply to get a job, if you apply to get a job as a reporter, because you're going to be putting stuff on that reel that doesn't matter from that market. It's like my buddy Brian. He had sent me this piece, and he was proud of it, and it was a pretty darn good story. It was a great get in Memphis, Tennessee. I think it was Memphis. And he said, I'm going to win an Emmy with this story. He goes, I'm going to get my next job with this story. And I had said to him, I said, you're not going to get anything with this story. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, you did a great job on this piece, but it required too much local knowledge. You served your audience really well, but you served your local audience. You're not going to get a job with this reel because nobody else is going to relate to it. They had to know about this and this and this and this that happened before it, and you didn't really explain it. And that was when he said, yeah, well, you live in San Francisco, and that's when I gave him the theory of universal appeal. Sure enough, he got a job at Baltimore, and he's one of the best reporters I know because he follows that theory of universal appeal. Again, it's the key to surviving as a journalist. Let me give you an example, okay? Hard news story, or close to a hard news story. How many drought stories have you seen in California this year? Too many. How many drought stories have I done? I mean, I did 1 or 2 a week last year, and I'll probably do 1 or 2 a week this year. Thank God I have a cast of characters. As a reporter, I know the lay of the land. I know who to call. I live in the North Bay. I've figured out who the good characters are. This was the first version. This was the first of 2 stories we did this day on the drought. It's narrative. I think it's compelling. I've never shown it before because I didn't even realize that it was, I think, as good as I think it is. Okay? So when this is over with, let's talk about why it works or doesn't work. Okay?
If you still wonder how desperate California ranchers have become for water in this dry, parched winter landscape.
We see that green spot above the fence there.
Take a ride with Don DiBernardi in southern Sonoma County. He rented a backhoe and started digging today based on a hunch that green grass on the ground might indicate a spring below.
I'm not the type of person to sit around and complain. I'm going to figure something out.
This has been a drought in which the paucity of water has gone from bad to the worst that he and his wife Bonnie have seen in 50 years of marriage.
He's a nervous wreck.
They raise cattle and also goats from which they make gourmet cheese. 3 kids were born this morning. Bonnie spent hours nursing the weakest one. No give up in her either.
I'm going to keep my fingers crossed I can keep her alive.
The DiBernardis are not alone in this struggle. Just up the road in southern Marin, Neil McIsaac described conditions drier than 5 generations of his family have seen since 1865.
If we don't get rain, this is going to be a long, long summer.
He's already decided to not wait for the county or state. Neil has found a source of water and will begin trucking it in this weekend.
This is beyond dry. I mean, we have no pasture. In the 70s, we had pasture.
There, now, go down.
By this afternoon, Don DiBernardi had tapped enough spring to maybe yield 100 gallons of water a day. It's one small victory. And in the living room, by a fire, here's another. They'll take those victories as they come. From Sonoma County, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
See? I told you no more dog stories. It's a goat story. Okay, so let's dissect that for a minute. Did that work as a news story? Did it feel like a news story? No. But was it a news story? Okay, so what did I do in that news story to make it narrative and to make it a story and not just the cramming of facts? What did it have? It had 3 characters, 3 different locations, but it had a situation, right? And there was something else that is even more crucial in that piece, and this is sort of my next trick. Okay, hang on a minute, I got to go back over here now. Be there. Okay. I don't think I have this story. It's got to be here. Well, it's the idea that, well, I'll have to adjust. It's the idea that there was something happening, okay? There was something happening. When you do a news story, when I walk into a room, I'm always trying to find out what's happening. Because if you can find what's happening, then you can build a narrative out of what's happening. You can always say, this is happening, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. All that stuff. So you had Don digging a well. You had Bonnie trying to save a life. And you had the other guy, McIsaac, trying to decide whether to wait for stuff from the state. So if you have all that going on, then you build a story around it.
Speaking of characters, how do you tell a compelling story that you know your viewers will find appealing, but your main characters get camera shy, making sound bites difficult to work with?
Oh, how do I make them? Well, then you make them comfortable and you find out what it is that they're comfortable with. There's the classic story is the guy who was, I'll show you this instead. I'll just show you a different story. I think this is going to be the first seminar ever where we don't show flies, but maybe we'll get to it in a minute. There was a guy who did a story once. They said, go to the circus and do a story about the elephant trainer. So I go to do the elephant trainer, and he turns out to be the most shy person on the planet. He's training the elephants. He takes care of the elephants. Every time I ask him a question, the answer is, Will, I just really like elephants. And I get this for an hour. We shoot him here, we shoot him here, we shoot him here. Finally, I just said to him, man, is there something I did to make you angry or to piss you off or whatever? I mean, you're not talking to me. He goes, oh, no, 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 it's not you. He goes, I just get really nervous being on television. I said, you get nervous being on television? You go in front of 3,000 people every night and perform. He says, well, I have stage fright. So what we thought was going to be a basic story about an elephant trainer turned into about a story about the elephant trainer who had stage fright. Okay? And all of a sudden, as long as we're talking about something he's comfortable with, it exploded. He was terrific. Okay, here's a story about something happening. The basic thing that's happening here is a photographer is... Yep. Okay. This is just I aired this piece this week, and this is an MMJ story. Okay. Okay. You want to talk about something happening. What was happening in this story is this guy is taking a picture, basically. Again, it's kind of elaborate in how we do the setup. It's a story about a guy who does, well, you'll see. This aired on Tuesday night. But on the concept of something happening.
Some guys may drive a long way just to fly a kite. Others may go even further to take a picture. In the case of Chris Benton, they're one and the same. This is Fort Barry near Point Bonita in the Marin Headlands, a tantalizing place, even with the residual morning mist.
I'm interested in landscapes, and this is a place that has a whole layer after layer of history.
He's a retired professor of architecture with a fascination for how structures change. So this place is a natural. Fort Barry has more than 100 years of bunkers, missile silos, and gun turrets left over from California's coastal defense system, and they're all in slow states of decay.
You see this up close, but it would be nice to see it in context.
That's where the kite comes in, an 8-foot, 6-sided ancient Japanese design called rokuku.
It's a pretty simple kite, and importantly for my purposes, stable.
It needs to be. Chris is about to hang a camera beneath it in a radio-controlled mount he designed and then built from a workbench sketch. How many cameras have you lost?
I've lost 2, but that's in 20 years.
And he's taken thousands of photographs. Chris brought a few of them along to show us.
By getting up and looking down, you see colors and patterns and artifacts that you just wouldn't have noticed while standing on the ground.
These from a book Chris did after 10 years and 250 trips documenting changes to the salt flats in San Francisco Bay. Everything shot from cameras suspended beneath kites. Here are bubbles at low altitude. The random crisscrossing of mudflats. These dots, migrating birds at rest.
Do you think of yourself as an artist or a scientist? I like to think of myself as both, and I think they intersect in rich ways.
Chris Benton is not the first photographer to hang a camera from a kite. They've been doing it for more than a century. Here's one of the most famous pictures, San Francisco in ruins, a panoramic image taken from 2,000 feet above the bay 3 weeks after the Great Quake of 1906.
And that was a 50-pound camera. I'm flying 3.5-pound cameras.
A camera hanging from a kite 200 feet above, a camera guided by the wind, looking down at the ruins of Fort Barry, high enough to see everything, yet close enough to capture the details in context.
It has a past, it has a history. In understanding landscapes, we don't know, how do you know where you are today in a landscape without a sense of what that place has been through time?
Such a peaceful way to spend a day in a beautiful place, once designed for war. From Fort Barry in the Marin Headlands, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
So that is a story that I really had not intended to show you because I didn't think it was all that good. But you just saw the last MMJ piece I did. Hold on. It aired, as I said, it aired on Tuesday night. And I think it aired because they decided it was pretty good. But in terms of, this idea of finding something going on and building a narrative about it, that's a really good example. But it's sort of a reverse way. It's not where I'm doing a daily news story and I walk in and the guy's digging a well and they're feeding a goat and all that. That's one way of finding something going on and building a story about it. This is another way of doing it. I really like the guy's pictures, right? But I can't sit there in a room with the guy showing me pictures in a book for very long. It's not going to be very good television. So how do you make good television out of a story like that? So I said to him, well, when's the next time you're going to go out and shoot? He says, well, I'm going to the Marin Headlands. I said, well, come along. So we did. Now, I used 4 cameras on that story. Did you know that? There was one camera mounted on the car, which I never used. There was another camera, my regular camera. And then I also used a digital DSLR. I used this, oddly enough, with a 14mm lens attached to the front for some of that stuff of him walking along next to the fence, the ultra-wide stuff. I was like this far away, and the shot through the crack. So I'm mixing, and the stuff at the end where he goes walking away. That's also 14mm lens. But again, the key is, what are you doing? How do I build a story about something going on? So the story in this case was him taking this picture. You have the beginning, you have the resolution, you have everything else. Now, we got a question here. It's a loaded question. How many of you know about the NPPA, National Press Photographers Association? Okay. They love these stories with fast cuts, fast action. They like a lot. I'll show you this open here, okay? This is very NPPA.
Some guys may drive a long way just to fly a kite. Others may go even further to take a picture. In the case of Chris Benton, they're one and the same. This is Fort Barry near Point
That right
Unique.
there is classic NPPA. They like fast cuts. And sometimes they'll take those fast cuts and they'll put them in between sentences, in between words, to, as they say, build up the pace. So the question, Ralph Bevins in Seattle. Hi, Ralph. And he knows the answer to this question. He goes, what is your opinion of the NPPA style, particularly the frequent interruptions of sound bites and voiceovers with nat sound? He's heard me write about this in the past. The answer is, I think you said it, it interrupts. I've got this theory, okay? But I might as well get into it. What do you see here? A chair. That's all you see, right? I mean, don't you see the way this is joined right over here? The way he did that. You see the way he sanded it right here? Didn't you notice that? I mean, that's a separate piece. There are a couple of screws in here. Did you see those? Oh, well, the screws are really well done, too. And what about this over here? There's another one right here. There's a base right there. I think there's a piece of bubble gum in here, but that's not supposed to be there. That's what I think of the NPPA style, most of the time. I think they have a good standard, but I think they get it carried away. What is this chair good for? Sitting in. When I'm sitting in it, I don't want to think about the screws and the bubble gum underneath the seat. I've got this theory called invisible writing, invisible editing, and invisible cutting. I'm not saying that I don't do fast cuts. You saw some right there in this piece. I do subscribe to some of the things they talk about. Steady shots, don't zoom or pan for any good reason unless you need to. Shoot sequences, you just saw a sequence right there. But anything that calls attention to itself in terms of writing, shooting, or editing takes attention away from the story. So, Mr. Bevins, the answer to your question is I think it's distracting unless it's done extremely well. And half the time, it isn't, if not most. A lot of times what people will do is they will telegraph that there's sound coming. They'll break up a sentence, nat sound, nat sound, nat sound, so that you know, nat sound, nat sound, nat sound, more sound is coming, nat sound, nat sound, nat sound, until nat sound. You think, nat sound. You're gonna go out of your flippin' mind. It's intrusive. Don't let anything get in the way. If it enhances the story, awesome. Do it. Don't get carried away. I call it Benihana. You ever been to Benihana? Okay, what do you remember, the meal or the chef? You want to remember the meal, not the chef. Now, you don't want to chop, chop, chop your way through a piece. The viewer is the person who should benefit from a story. Look, we all have skills. We all want to show what we can do, but there's a place for it. and restraint is a good option. Sometimes less is more. So I was given 40 minutes for this segment. When I lost that piece of video, that cost me 5 minutes. I'm sorry for that. I thought I had that piece of video. It's the first time we've ever shown that piece of video. We might have to start the second section with that, if we find it. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the stuff they make us do. The third section, I'm going to get deep into writing and structuring, because that's at the essence of storytelling. But the second section coming up, it's going to be about the stuff they make us do. Specifically, live shots, and tweeting, and a couple of other things. Having to do 2 stories in a day. Okay, so let's take about a 5-minute break. Okay, so let's just begin where we left off. This is the piece I was trying to get you that I thought I'd encoded, that I had it encoded. I know about that media player. I've been using MPEG stream clip. I'm not that techie guy. I know I got MPEG stream clip back and forth. Okay, so, but back on the idea of something happening. One of the reasons I'm going to show you this darn piece is because I've been doing these seminars since 1985, and every single one of them have always shown this story, and we don't want to break the streak. This is a real simple story. It's a good example of having a story in your hip pocket, okay? I'm working at Cron. It's a Thursday night. I'm ready to go home. My buddy on the assignment desk named Todd Hanks says, Wayne, you got to pick up line 6. I don't want to pick up line 6. Pick up line 6. I pick up line 6. There's a lady on the phone. She goes, there's a fly epidemic on the Western Addition. I'm going, ma'am, you can't have a fly epidemic. She goes, there's flies on the rest of it. I said, I care. You know, you got to get rid of them. You got to do a story on it. I'm going, ma'am, it's just flies. It's just an epidemic. You can't have an epidemic. You can have an infestation. But you don't do very many stories about infestations. I'm 28 years old. I think I know everything, right? So I go home. I wrote her number down, went home. Next day I come back, they want me to cover the school board. And I go, and they go, Freedman, you got a better idea? I said, yeah, there's a fly epidemic in the Western Addition. Okay? I figured that I've shown this forever because it's true. She was passionate about flies, so I knew I had a good character. I didn't know what she looked like. But I figured if she could talk to me for 2.5 minutes on the telephone about flies, I could probably fill 1.5 minutes with a woman who's crazy about flies. So they bought it. We walked in the door, and you want to talk about something going on, it never stopped. This whole story is built around a woman swatting flies.
It is another chapter in the continuing struggle between man and nature.
Oh, that one.
Flies, they're all over her apartment, all over everything. So Peggy Hawkins has declared war.
They bite. They swarm your ceiling. They sing in your ear. You can't sleep.
It isn't just an isolated apartment, it is an entire housing complex. It's been this way for a month and getting worse. There are flies in the Western Addition.
There's one, and you'll see lots more. Yeah. Folks around here are calling it an epidemic.
Every time I open my window or my door, man, they just swarm me.
There was 3 in my bed this morning. Flies. And they're just everywhere. I don't know what's going on.
Well, today, City Environmental Health Inspector Tom Wright looked around. He points to a nearby vegetable garden as the breeding ground.
The organic material plus the moisture that's there, and this is what it takes to grow flies.
Meantime, back in the apartment.
They are so smart till they'll light on you and you go to hit at them, they won't even budge. No, you ain't even about you.
If you could say something to the flies, what would it be?
Get the hell away from me.
And they will, eventually. Inspector Wright calls this a seasonal infestation. As the weather cools, the flies will leave. But when?
You can have a weatherman, I don't.
Until whenever that is, Peggy Hawkins says she'll get plenty of exercise. In San Francisco, Wayne Freedman, News Center 4.
Okay, so now you know why I had to show you that story. It's the perfect, honest to God, I think it's the perfect local television news story. You got everything. You got the victim, you got the villains, they're the flies. See, now we've done dogs, we've done goats, and we've done flies. I'm sorry.
You had a cat in there, too.
Did I have a cat in there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I like animals, okay? I mean, I really love golf, but you're not going to see any of that stuff today. But again, you walked in the door. It was very spontaneous. Todd Hanks was the photographer, same guy on the desk. He walks in the door. The woman starts banging. He just starts rolling, right? We never even got the microphone out. We don't want to lose the spontaneity. And we built the whole story around a 45-second sequence of a woman going whack, whack, whack on flies. And then I sit down to do an interview, and she's still whacking on flies. How do you miss on that? Okay? They don't get any better than that. So that's why I show that story. What's happening? She's swatting flies. That's what's happening. But how did that guy, the guy from the environmental, actually came out and talked to us? And then he said what he said on television? You have a weatherman, I don't? I mean, come on. I mean, I'd work another 40 years if every day was like that. But that was back in the good old days before the internet and all that other stuff came along. Okay. So look. So Bob from New York. Hi, Bob. Bob wants to know, what does your process look like from assignment to location, back to the studio, and then to the edit? Are you writing on the way, editing on the way? Bob, I never get to the station. There are weeks when I don't even see the station. I talk to the assignment desk in the morning and they send me somewhere. And I meet up with a crew and then we shoot the story, and then I'm in the truck. I'm on this computer. I'm taking an SD drive. I'm logging my tape off the SD drive. I'm putting it in a Microsoft Word, and I'm writing version 1 while the editor is, the photographer, editor is feeding back tease material and ingesting. I write number 1. While I write number 1, he cuts, while he cuts number 1, I'm writing number 2. And then he cuts number 2, and then they're asking for more feed stuff. And in between, I'm sending scripts to the office to let them know, and on and on. That's my workflow. I mean, from assignment to location, back to the studio, then to the edit. Are you writing on the way? Yes, I'm writing on the way in my mind. Actually, I'm kind of get into this a little bit, because this sort of plays into what we're going to talk about next, which is the stuff they make us do. Not only am I writing on the way, I'm tweeting on the way. And sometimes my tweeting is my writing, and sometimes the tweeting is the note-taking. So the stuff they make us do, I'm making myself do this. And it's sort of, it's about storytelling, yes, but it's also about processes in the storytelling. And the stuff they make us do is, they make us do live shots. They make us do 2 versions of stories every day. And they make us tweet. And they make us post on Facebook. Write this down right now. @WayneFreedman. I need all the help I can get on my Facebook page. So we're going to talk about those 3 things for a while. Going live, doing twofers, and God help us, social media. That is the title of this section. I want to be blunt with you right off the top. And this is the talking part, okay? I just wrote articles about this. I'm going to give you the articles in a nutshell. If you're a television news reporter, you may fear live shots. You may even loathe them. You probably worry about stumbling and stammering. You might wonder, why are you there when the event happened 5 hours earlier? And it's not going to do you a darn bit of good. You're going to be there anyway, because they want that extra visual element. They need to fill the time. They need to do whatever they do. I mean, I come from an era, dinosaur. I remember we did stories on film. We crafted stories with, I mean, what you've seen so far are basically crafted stories, right? Well, that's not the way this business is going now. Now it's like me standing here right now. I talk, and I point, and maybe we go to a VO. That's the way the business is going. We don't just craft anymore. Now we have to craft our live shots. I said to a noon producer once, I said, level with me. Tell me the truth. I said, why do you need me to do a live shot on this story? She looks me straight in the eye. She says, because I don't have enough writers. I said, okay. I appreciate the honesty. Went out and did the live shot. She thanked me. The positive of a live shot is you can update the latest information in a breaking news story. That's when it really works. The latest information. Something is happening right now. You don't have time to get the pictures, don't have time to get the sound bites. You can talk about what you need to talk about. You can fill in the blanks. That's all really good stuff. That's where they're a great tool. And I'm going to show you some examples of that before we're done. So, even though you got to sit in the van all day, and even though you're going to get roasted like a turkey in the summertime, and you're going to freeze like a turkey in the wintertime, and you have less room in that van than Apollo astronauts did, these live shots aren't going away. You're going to do those live shots because they told you to do the live shot. And if you do the live shot well, you're going to advance your career. If you don't do the live shot well, find another way of working, because there is no getting around it. And believe me, you don't have teleprompters, you don't have scripts, you don't have anything. You got to go off the top of your head. So even if it's that dumb live shot where everybody left, you got to stand there. You got to take advantage of it. The same way you talk about what's happening in the story, you can talk about what's happening in that dumb live shot, even though the meeting ended officially at 9 o'clock. 3 hours ago, it went on unofficially for quite a while in the parking lot behind us. Okay? So now you're making that location relevant. Simple way of doing it. Make the most of your environment in these live shots. Go mobile. Our photographers like to lock us down somewhere along because they don't want the shaky shot. I think a live shot is probably the only place where a shaky shot might work because it's live. You know, my dad invented the live handheld electronic camera. He was the first guy for ABC News. Back in 1956, came up with the idea of taking a film chain camera and carrying it around the convention floor of the Democratic Convention, 1956. Then he started walking around on the sidelines of football games with that camera by 1960. Then they built a special camera for him. They called it the Press Orth. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. He did all that stuff. So, and he was handheld, and handheld had movement, and handheld felt live, and live feels okay. So I'm okay if you handhold the camera. Take the viewer somewhere. It's the one place where a jiggling camera may improve a look. I kind of think of the lens as being a window, and a live shot as an opportunity to be voyeuristic. I've actually gone to meetings, gone to the door where a meeting is going on, and cracked the door open and had the camera peek inside. Again, you're using the live to be live, not just to be a stand-up talking head. All right. Let me go to seminar clips, and I know this part converted. I'm going to show you one that I did just a couple months ago. And it's a crazy live shot. But boy, did it get a lot of, I talk about moving around, talking. So you remember the Napa earthquake, right? Wall-to-wall coverage. I was on the air from this spot at 5 in the morning, and I was back there at 5 in the afternoon after everything else. It was a crack in the road on Highway 21. And when you're doing wall-to-wall coverage, it's like, okay, Wayne, we're coming to you. You're going to talk for 3 minutes. You can't take notes. You just got to talk. You got to find something going on. So literally, this is a good example of finding something going on, something we had referred to earlier. I beefed it up with some production elements. I said, cut some VO from when we were here this morning, roll that in when I call for it. We have some real good guys back in this station here. They rolled it in. But basically, you want to talk about a live shot that's mobile, that's moving. This might be it. And then some. Now, with all that bad news today, I'm going to give you some good news. Behind me, Highway 121 with traffic. Let me show you some video from early this morning, about 5 a.m., 5:36, just as the sun was coming up. You see that big crack in the road? Do you see this video? That huge crack in the road? That was Highway 121, a crack that went all the way across the highway. It rose 18 inches at one point. Well, if you come back to a live picture now, let's show you the same location. Caltrans has been working on it. There's still a crack across the roadway, but that big portion that was 18 inches, they've leveled it off, they've smoothed it off, they've filled it up with tar, and traffic is moving smoothly here as if, well, except for the cones, as if there was never any problem at all. But that crack does continue. It's not only over there on that side of the road, but if Mike will follow me up this hill here, there are cracks all the way through this vineyard. Don't slip, Mike. Don't slip. Don't slip. We've got to get Mike to retirement. Over here, this is one of those cracks. These cracks extend all the way through this vineyard, and they're not shallow. I'm going to show you. Watch this. This is a crack. We estimate it, well, we don't know how deep it is, but it is so deep that lying here, I'm still not touching the bottom of this crack. That's a deep crack. And you've never seen a reporter lie down on the job before, have you? Well, you have now. So that's the good news. It's getting better on Highway 121. Live in Napa, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
Boy, that is quite the demonstration, Wayne. Glad you got your arm back.
Yes.
They liked that so much, they said, hey, can you stick your arm in the crack again at 5, at 6? I'm going, Well, you know, it's kind of spontaneous. Well, do it again. And when you do your 11 o'clock story, can you stick your arm in the crack again? I'm going, really, guys? Boy, they loved it. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, it's just a little crack. Nobody remembers Loma Prieta where I jumped in the whole gaping hole in the ground. They all think that I'm risking my life, that it's got a crack close. You know what? Somebody at home takes that picture of me with my arm in the crack, and he tweets it. Now, I had been tweeting, and we're going to talk about this later today, I had already picked up 365 followers from tweets that day. He tweets that thing, it goes viral. Picture of the reporter with his crack in the ground. I'm doing a story in Napa yesterday, right? I'm interviewing a guy. I go, hi, I'm Wayne Freedman. He goes, oh yeah, I know you. You're the guy with his arm in the crack. I'm going, come on, dude, really? I mean, my dad was a great photographer, right? The shot that he is most famous for is when he was live on the sidelines of a football game. An Ohio State player fumbled. Woody Hayes had a fit, turned, and went after the first thing he saw, which was my dad, and he attacks the camera live on national television. That's my dad's most famous shot. Trust me, it's not his best shot. It's his most famous shot. Right now, I keep hearing about the arm in the crack. My wife goes, couldn't you have worn some better shoes? I said, honey, I'm walking around that day. She says, those weren't very hip shoes. So she turned around and she bought me these. So what did I get out of the crack on the live shot? I got this. And the next morning, I got a call from Cecilia Vega, a friend of ours who used to work here at ABC7, now a network correspondent. I thought she was calling to congratulate me on the crack. She goes, no. She says, where is that crack? I said, why? You going to stick your arm in too? She goes, no, we just want to show it. So you do weird stuff in a live shot. We got away with it. Now, you're not going to get away with something like that in a newscast where everything's tight, but when you're vamping, look, we took a walk, we looked around, it worked pretty well. So did you notice how we added the VO as a production element? That's one thing you can do to make a live shot work a little bit better. Look, it wasn't tight, okay? It was vamping, but it's okay, because it's live. It's the way you talk in real life. You can do all kinds of stuff to increase production elements in live shots. Sometimes I'll start a live shot with a sound bite. And then out of that sound bite, I'll go to trailing VO. And then from that trailing VO, I'll roll a second sound bite. And then more trailing VO. And all of a sudden, it's like a little mini package voiced live. Doesn't have to be precise. Just add an element. Make it more interesting. Doesn't take a lot of work. Now, and you're lucky if you're doing it these days, because back in the old days, you had to hit those VOs to the second. They didn't have the second thing rolling in. You have to be 22 seconds live to your next, and you don't know if they're rolling it live or not, right? I mean, look, I've been doing live shots a long time. I've got horror stories. First live shot I ever did was a disaster. I'd been working in Louisville, Kentucky. They hired me as a photographer, but I wanted to be a reporter, so I showed up my first day of work in Louisville, Kentucky as a photographer wearing a $400, which was expensive at the time, a $400 three-piece suit. And they said, you're the best dressed photographer we've ever seen. I said, well, I want to make a good impression. I want to be a reporter. They said, good, here's a camera, go put it on your shoulder. Well, 2 weeks after that, they had a train derailment, or they thought it was a train derailment. It was actually one wheel off one train somewhere, and they sent me out there because nobody else was available. So I get out there, it's my first live shot, I'm really excited, and there's a crowd of kids around there, right? And I'm saying, okay guys, we're gonna go live here in a few minutes, so when the camera's on, don't wave or do anything like that, because this is really important stuff. It was one wheel, right? So what do they do when the camera goes on? They're waving, they're jumping around in front of the camera, they're like jumping in front of me. The cameraman's now trying to fake them out and move over here. He's trying to juke them, they're trying to juke back. I'm going, it's a disaster. And the anchorman says to me, hey, by the way, Wayne, where was that train derailment? And I honestly didn't know. I didn't know. I said, I don't know, Ken. You just got here. So my first live shot was actually a derailment in its own right, and turned out to be my first humorous kicker inadvertently. So you're going to make mistakes, okay? Make your mistakes in markets that you can leave. When you're doing live shots, beware of typical cliches. If one reporter says, as you can see behind me, duh. Even as we speak, let's take a live look at, We want to tell you. I can now tell you that. Well, of course you can tell me that. Of course. There's some reporters, they'll use the words of course 4, 5, 6 times in a live shot. It's sport to count the words. How many times? We take bets. So you're going to say of course 3 times or 5 times? Oh, 7 times. We both lose. Look, live reporters love spouting such phrases. They're a waste of breath. Don't do it. The worst one is the word now. Now, they'll start sentences in the live shots with the word now this, now I'm turning the page, now he's doing this. It's like, what? They think it adds immediacy, but it really doesn't add anything. So don't say now, just get it. Try speaking naturally. How's that for a trick? Just talk like you would tell your friend. I mean, when you're walking down the street, do you trip over your feet? Well, you're not going to trip if you talk naturally, okay? So you're not going to goof it up. Speak naturally. Everybody's going to goof up when they're live. You're never going to say it perfectly. You think the verbatim on that last live shot was very good? I've never taken the verbatim of that last live shot. I don't really want to know what I said because I repeated myself 4 or 5 times, but it's okay because it was live and it's local news and we're vamping for 2 or 3 minutes, so it's all right. It's live. You're not going to be perfect. The people who get in trouble doing live shots are the ones who try to speak live as precisely as they write. Ain't gonna happen, okay? So don't try memorizing words. Instead, here's a novel thought. Get comfortable with your material. Know it backwards and forwards. Happened last night. I was doing a live shot with Kevin Costner. They wanted to have Kevin Costner on the red carpet at the Napa County Film Festival. And Kevin was late. So they said, okay, just kill your on camera, kill your tag, which was on tape. Just come back live and vamp for us. It's like, okay. I hadn't planned on having to go back live at the end of this package, but they'd lopped off the end of the package. So thank goodness I had a few more facts. I said, well, you know, Kevin hasn't arrived yet, but they're expecting 10,000 people here this weekend. You know, this is not just in Napa City. It's on screens all around the area. They have 14 theaters. They have 150 films. It's in Napa. It's in Calistoga. It's in St. Helena. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Still waiting on Kevin Costner. See you later. Right? Take the extra facts, know your materials, and go with it. Ever heard of a word trail? I told you this was going to be wordy. Okay, this is like a big, long live shot for me right now. I've actually gotten to the point where I'm half decent with it. I only screw up once or twice in a live shot. Ever heard of a word trail? Okay, a lot of reporters write down stuff like this. Their notes are long. I write down words. I write down keywords. So you keep your live shots short. And I connect the words like you would connect steps walking along a walkway or on a path. I mean, here's a word trail after a fatal collision between 2 firefighting planes. Standing outside the gates of the airbase. On my notepad, I wrote these words. I'm checking this word. I wrote flowers for my first keyword. Flowers led to flowers and notes pinned on the gate tell a story of sadness and loss. Flowers reminded me to talk about the flowers on the gate. So it did. For the second word, I wrote privacy because other pilots had asked us to keep a distance. Privacy led to, this is a group of close people. They work together, they play together. Tonight they're asking for privacy as they grieve together. Okay, now I'm just talking. It's 2 words have led to 2 sentences. So I ad-libbed those. Only the roll cue wrote in full. Why do you write the roll cue? First, as a courtesy to your director, and also because if you completely flub up, you can just look at the roll cue and bail out. And believe me, I have bailed out more times than you can count. Fighting fires with airplanes has always been risky. Crews know it. They accept it. Tonight, they're dealing with it. Okay, so that one worked out okay. Connected the words, the word trail. Think about it. Keep it simple. Know your facts. Connect the words. You're going to be okay. I mean, look, there have been times on the air where I've had a loss for words. I mean, 4 seconds seems like 40. I mean, there have been times I was like, it's the strangest feeling when the words don't come out. This is going to happen, especially when you start out and you're nervous. It's okay. You're going to leave that market eventually. It has happened to me in large markets too. I remember once the best, Daryl, do you remember back in, remember we did that big storm coverage in Sausalito, and Carl Twentier was our assistant news director, and we had the big live shots set up. We were at Cron. We were going to do live, it was a big storm hits the Bay Area, right? And they want to do live wraparounds to lead the newscast from the North Bay to the South Bay, and I'm on the coast in Sausalito, and I had done one live shot earlier, and then we wanted to go to a second location 20 minutes away. And my assistant news director is screaming at me saying, if you don't make that live shot, you're fired. I'm thinking, I'm just trying to get you a better location. He says, if you don't make it, you're fired. So we have lots of time to set that live shot up. We have 5 minutes. We're on the Broadway in the Bridgeway in Sausalito. So George Griswold, a friend of mine, is the photographer. So we're stringing out the mic, right? And I start walking, and all of a sudden, I realize I don't have enough cord. The cord snaps. The end of the microphone goes in San Francisco Bay. I'm going to get the microphone, and all my notes with my roll cues and my SOTs and all the stuff I need for this complicated wraparound tease, all those notes go in the bay. Now I'm standing there, the wind is blowing, it's cold, I've been threatened with being fired. We're trying to help everybody out. And they come to me, and I'm like, I start talking, and the wind starts blowing even more, and it was an act of God. I was absolutely frozen, literally and figuratively and emotionally and mentally, and my notes were gone, and the wind and the rain were coming down so hard that they literally blew us off the air at that moment. Because now, otherwise, I might not be standing here today. Act of God, failed live shot. This stuff happens. Do you remember that one, Daryl? You do remember that one, don't you? Yeah. Didn't know how lucky I was, did you? Daryl Compton was sitting in the back of the room. He worked at Cron at the time, and yeah, that was a crazy, ambitious thing. So they're going to put all kinds of pressure on you, and you need to be smooth, or as smooth as you can be. So let me show you a live shot that combines everything we talked about, including one thing I didn't talk about, which is you want your voice when you're talking to match your voice in the script. This is one of those things that news directors look at when they're hiring people from one market to another. They don't want you to talk one way and sound another way on the video. You got to talk the same inflection, same voice. You can't be talking live and then, right? You got to be level. So this is a story that integrates, well, it was a complete vamp. It was done with no notes. Remember the Yosemite climbers back in 2005? When they're up there in El Capitan and they're getting battered by the wind. There are 2 or 3 dikes of this stuff, and we're covering every bit of it. And they're trying to get these people off the cliff, and climbers have died. And there's still people up on the mountain on the second night. And you know, about 10 minutes before air, a ranger kind of comes by, and we're talking. I'm saying, man, those guys are still up there on the mountain. He goes, I don't know what we're going to do. He says, the only thing we could think of doing next, he says, we might try to throw a line to them from a helicopter, but you know, that's never been done around here, and I don't think we're going to try it. But I talked to him a little bit about the technique. He says, oh yeah, well, it's fairly easy. We do it this, we do this, we do this, but da-da-da-da. So, okay. So I've got a pretty good live shot written. I'm ready to go on, and all of a sudden, a helicopter comes out of the fog. So what you're going to see here is one vamping reporter, one really good photographer who does a wonderful move up the mountain. You're going to see a reporter who threw out all his notes, who went off the top of his head, who knew his material. You'll see the package, and then you'll see the tag. And pray to the God of MPEG Stream Clip.
And ABC 7's Wayne Freedman is live once again in Yosemite Valley with more on an effort that already has seen the deaths of 2 climbers. Wayne?
And Pete, right now it's very dramatic. I'm going to take a quick shook right up the mountain here. You're looking at about 2,500 feet above the valley floor. That is a Ranger Service helicopter. They are dropping supplies to 2 men who are still in a tent on the side of the cliff tonight. These are 2 men that will come out tomorrow. This is a technique that is rarely done. They've never attempted it here before. Inside that white pouch are sleeping bag, clothing and supplies so that they can get through the night. Just for the record, the tally now is 5 people down off the mountain. 3 of them are safe, 2 of them are dead, and 2 more, these 2, still on the face of El Capitan. Until the bodies of 2 Japanese climbers came down this afternoon, the reality seemed so distant. This man and woman died just 250 feet from the summit.
They may not have been aware that the route was entirely retreatable.
El Capitan's crisis began with a sudden and brutal winter storm early this week. Cold winds and rain battered 7 people at the time. Dave Turner was the first to be rescued yesterday and says he learned a lesson.
Maybe I won't do much different, but at least I'll be more aware that it can hit the fan.
From below today, it was a lot like watching ants. People peered through binoculars at this on-again, then off-again, then on-again effort to reach other distressed climbers. Volunteers rappelled down and then helped them up. These 2 climbers said nothing when they finally reached the valley floor after a 6-hour rescue effort. Their saviors never expected such a difficult task.
Our guys have been getting lowered in icy cold water and sleeping out there for more days than they thought, so it's been tough duty up there.
But among rescue crews, El Capitan represents a mecca. There are fewer, tougher places. If it takes great skill to climb this face, imagine what it takes to save men from it. And you're getting a good look at that right now. Men in a helicopter in the fog along the cliff. They have just dropped the bag with supplies to the men in the tent. It looks as if it's been successful because the helicopter is flying off. So the guys in that tent will have a more comfortable night tonight than they did last night or the night before. They were wet and they were cold. It was a pretty brutal storm. So that is the latest from El Capitan. 5 down, 2 more still up there, but they expect they'll be able to get them down tomorrow. This was probably the most exciting part of it. It timed out pretty well. Reporting live from Yosemite National Park, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News. Okay. The line, it timed out pretty well. That was a dig at my producers. Because I'd been screaming at them, come to me now, they're going off the mountain now. They're going, no, we have to do weather first. I'm going, guys, we got to do this now. So when I'm saying it timed out pretty well, well, I guess it timed out pretty well. Okay, but did you notice what Paul Zarro did, his camera work? I mean, again, you want to talk about not noticing something very complicated. He went up and hit his doubler, and he came down and undoubled, and I don't think he even noticed. And he was smooth he never lost focus. That's pretty good. And he vamped with me. He didn't know exactly what I was going to say. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say. I said everything I knew. That was a complete and total brain dump. But it was based on experience and based on a conversation and based on saying, okay, to heck with the script that we have, and go off and do a different live shot. Okay? So you got to do that sometimes, and sometimes it works. But again, if you looked at the verbatim of what I said, and believe me, I have, it's in here, I would never write what I said. I'd never write it that way. But you're not going to notice the flaws when it's a live shot. And it was exciting, so it kind of worked. So that's part 1 of the stuff they make us do that we don't want to do. Part 2 is twofers. And you know what I mean about twofers, right? If not threefers. And sometimes it's fourfers. It's like, you're going to go out and do a story. Now we got to do another version of the story for the next newscast. You got a 5 and you got a 6. And the 6 can't look like the 5. You got to do 2 different versions of the same story. And that's standard now. Even though the audience rotates, you got to make a change, especially at the beginning. Now I'm going to jump my own shark here a bit and talk a little bit about structure, because structure is the key. And in the next section, I'm going to go into great detail on structuring stories. But structure will get you through the day here. All you do, if you got to do one story and then you got to do another story, is take an element and move it around. Take a middle part, move it to beginning. Take the beginning, move it to the middle. Maybe you change a soundbite. Maybe you change a line over here. You can do the same piece, you just move it around a little. Take the beginning, make it the ending, take the ending, make it the beginning, change the soundbite, introduce another character, maybe add a stand-up, and all of a sudden, you got 2 different stories. I went in, I didn't know what to pull.
I was looking in my archives to see, okay, what do I have that I had to do Tuesday? Because, you know, most of the time, I don't save a lot of stuff anymore, so I wanted to look and see, do I have anything here that I did 2 stories one day? This morning I found this. These are from the Super Bowl about a year and a half ago. Nothing special story, okay? We're doing 2, 3 a day. Are the 49ers going to win the Super Bowl? We're in New Orleans. Hey, maybe the card reader voodoo guy can tell us, okay? So all I'm going to do is run this for you here and give you a look at 2 rush jobs. Same material. We didn't take any more time to shoot the 2 than we would the 1. While we were airing the first one, we were cutting the second one. Okay? But you'll notice how they're structured differently. They're going to run back to back. We are on St. Peter Street in the French Quarter. There are more and more 49er fans appearing, and they're all talking about the spread. It's 3.5 points in favor of the Niners right now. But we needed something more specific. So here we are, Reverend Zombie's House of Voodoo. They have a lot of interesting things in here, some of which we're not allowed to show you because it's a very sacred place. But if you walk in the back and you have the right connections at just the right time, and you go behind this screen right over here, you might get an answer.
Put your hands out over the cards. I want you to picture the game.
Who needs odds makers when in New Orleans you can hire a psychic like Darren Bouquet? He's a master of the mystic arts, a tarot card reader, trying to decipher all the complex intricacies of a football game.
If you're asking me who's going to win, but in a boxing match, it's a lot easier than asking me which teams. There's so many variables.
But in New Orleans, Reverend Zombie's House of Voodoo came highly recommended and positively yelped. It is a charming establishment filled with powerful souvenirs. Behind the screen in the reading room, I served as a medium for the 49ers, visualizing plays and the game. Mr. Bouquet was somewhat conflicted in his read, but here's what he saw.
It seems to me that you're dominating the first quarter. However, it also seems to me that they are building momentum for the second quarter.
So do we have a clear winner?
Your regret is upside down, and their sorrow is sideways. So if you're going to add that numerically, I can't really say, but I can say that you're looking pretty good. I would shore up the offense, though.
And that, dear friends, is why card readers make big bucks.
Now, having heard all of that, you have to wonder, why would the Baltimore Ravens even bother to show up and play the game? Live in New Orleans, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
As the Super Bowl approaches, the streets of New Orleans have begun to fill with amateur soothsayers.
I feel the Ravens are going to win. Niners.
Somebody got to win, somebody got to lose.
Clearly, a serious fan needs a professional, so thank goodness for Dr. Zombie's House of Voodoo, a charming establishment that came highly recommended and positively yelped, where for a mere swipe of the card and $40, an astute and anxious fan can catch a glimpse into the future.
Everybody's worried about the Super Bowl.
Can you localize your energy and relax and really tie into the game and what's going to happen?
Yes.
Okay. Beautiful.
With that, we entered the physical and spiritual realm of Darren Bouquet, a master of the mystic arts, a tarot card reader. I picked him, he deciphered them.
The Eight of Cups is about walking away from old feelings.
That could be good, actually. The Niners leaving frustration behind, but the Ravens will not go easily.
Wow. All right. They're scoring some major points here.
The game is going to be close, he says. It's difficult to make an accurate read when every football play involves 22 people with 22 destiny strings. Then I pulled a card for Coach Harbaugh.
So you picked him sideways where he really has a hard time with his decision that he made.
Kaepernick, Smith, how could a tarot card reader see all of that?
It seems to me that you're dominating the first quarter. However, it also seems to me that they are building momentum for the second quarter.
So do we have a clear winner?
Your regret is upside down, and their sorrow is sideways. So if you're going to add that numerically, I can't really say, but I can say that you're looking pretty good. I would shore up the offense, though.
And that, dear friends, is why they pay card readers the big bucks. It was a visit worth every penny. And then some.
And that parking ticket was the price we paid for our visit to Reverend Zombie's House of Voodoo. You know, based on the prognostication we heard, you have to wonder, why is Baltimore even showing up to play the game? In New Orleans, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News. So you see definite similarities, right, between those two stories? But you also see the differences. So we basically did a short little version for the early one, and then we did, a little more for the other one, and tried to mix it up a little bit. All right. Let me just go on to my next little section here. Yes, him. Let's take a good look at him. His name is Dan Kane. He is my first semi-viral tweet. And I'm going to get to him. But let's be honest first. I mean, I'm not fully aware of how this Twitter thing got to be where it's at. I mean, I'm an old school guy. We worked in a very secretive business. We would drive around in cars with two-way radios, and we would talk in code. We didn't want brand X or brand Y to know what we had until the end of the day. We wanted it all to be a big surprise. We wanted them to watch our news. We didn't want them to know what we had, because then they'd get it too. So, but that's not anymore. I mean, now we don't have a deadline at night at 6. Now these deadlines have become hourly, almost minute, and they're all on Twitter. Our newsroom monitors Twitter feeds like they're wire feeds. The way we looked at the wires, and it's kind of neat. It's a little bit strange. I mean, I used to say, in all earnest, first of all, I had a problem with the name. I would say, real men don't tweet. Well, let me tell you something. This real man does tweet. I tweet a lot, actually. The bosses require it. It's part of the job description now. I'm on Twitter. I am on Facebook. I am constantly feeding Twitter and Facebook all day long. I do little things because you know what? When you're on Twitter, at Wayne Freedman, at WAYNE-FREEDMAN, I need your demographic. This is a bold appeal. I get into dialogues with my potential viewers. I get tips on stories. People tell me about stuff that I hadn't thought of. They tell me the questions that I might want to ask. I mean, a lot of them are goofballs, I got to be honest with you. But you get some good stuff on Twitter. And then they know what we're working on. Unfortunately, the other station knows what we're working on too. So I don't tell them anything, no matter what we say. The thing that's kind of strange about this is that for old schoolers like me, when we began, this was a one-way communication business. We talked, we broadcast, they listened. But it's not that way anymore. We talk, we tweet, they respond, we react, and on and on and on. It's different now. It's a dialogue with your viewers, with your audience. You might as well embrace it. It's not going away. Everybody's empowered. Everybody's a reporter in one way or another, and we're the more formal reporters, and we're doing their bidding a lot of the time. So Dan Kane, my first viral tweet. This was at the Stanford-Oregon football game last year. And I was cutting a 5 o'clock or cutting a 6 o'clock. I think I was cutting the 6 o'clock at that point. And I looked outside, and here's this guy who got this sign, "Marry me, Shaylee Gibbons. I swear the ring cost more than my Ducks tickets." He made that sign so he could carry it in the stadium, so that he could get shot on television, and he wanted to propose to Shaylee this way. So it became a tweet. What do you think the caption was? "No matter the outcome of tonight's game, we know one sure winner. She said yes." It went wild on Facebook. It went wild on Twitter. For what it's worth, I tweet photographs pretty much every day on whatever I'm working. And they're picture stories. I call them, for lack of a better description, I call them Twitter narratives. If I'm not using this iPhone, and I don't use it very often, usually I'm using this thing. It's a little Canon S100 camera.
You can put a wireless card in there and you can send it right to your phone if you want to. This is actually a very good camera, and I'll show you a picture I took with it later. It shoots RAW. If you know anything about photography, you know that those are really high quality negatives. And then sometimes I go really crazy and I pull out my big camera, which is a Nikon D800. I went out and bought really expensive 2.8 lenses. I love taking pictures. It makes me happy. I'm taking pictures all the time in the field. So I figured what I would do here is I'd just show you some of the photographs I've taken at different stories. I don't necessarily remember the captions, but these are the kind of things that we do. Here's some pictures that I took, and everything we took with it was, this was when President Obama, I did a story once on President Obama. We had to do it's the typical watch, okay? This is the president's leaving SFO, and it's our job to keep an eye on Air Force One. So I did a story on what the press, I tweeted the process of what the press goes through to take a picture of the president leaving the airport. So I started with the dog sniffing our vans. We talked about the barricade and the plane, and then we go out and parade the airplane, and then how dramatic it is while we're waiting for the airplane, and showing the rusty thing over here. And I forget exactly what I said about them. If you go back to Twitter, you can find the tweets. More reporters. We waited so long somewhere underneath the darn thing. Even the Secret Service finds this thing a little bit tedious after a while. You know the president is coming when the guys on the roof start aiming their telescopes and their binoculars. Okay, here he is. POTUS arrives. And there were other shots that went along with this, but this was the money shot. Now, I actually like that. And that thing got retweeted a lot. Pretty good picture. It sort of takes the essence. And you know, as a guy that likes taking pictures, I get off on that, right? It's a good photograph, and it captures the moment. I guess I'm a still photographer at heart. Let me see what else we have here. Remember the fire in Weed a couple of weeks ago? I tweeted a whole bunch of stuff out of Weed. This was one of them. I think the caption on this tweet was "Backyard with a View." That's with a 14mm lens. And then later that night, I was struck by how the people of Weed were helping everybody else. So I took another photograph that night of it was a tent that everybody had suddenly gotten together, and everybody in town who had survived the fire decided to donate whatever they could to help the people who were hurt by the fire. So I took this picture. And what's interesting is, it's come to the point now where some of our photographers now take these pictures that I take, and we will integrate them into stories. Because, that was a raw image, and it doesn't look so good on this camera, but trust me, this TV, but if you send it the right way, it looks pretty good. So then they sent me to the World Series, and I must have picked up a ton of followers on the World Series. And I'm just going to run you through that, and then we'll take another break. Hopefully all these things will come up. Come on, open up. Don't you love iCloud? Okay. First day of the series. Walking around the stand, and we're doing all I did for 3.5 weeks was stories about fans. But it's interesting how you can find out who's a good talker. You take their picture. It turned out to be a good interview. So there was this woman, I just loved her face. Tweeted her, put her on Facebook. Here's your standard shot of fans going in the stadium. Everybody had a tribute jersey. This is a reporter from a rival station. Couldn't resist taking that picture. I really like this one. I remember this. I remember the the tweet on this one, the caption was, "The Armada arrives." You got Grandma getting into the boat. You got the lady over here with the cap. You got the stadium in the background. You got the sky. And all of these, you know, get attention from people once you do them. Here's a bit with. I just was fascinated by the banners, right? And then all of a sudden the national anthem plays, and I'd already focused on the banner, and you know the streamers fell down. Made a pretty good picture. Now I still regard this as storytelling. Okay, I'm tweeting this stuff out through the day as it goes on. Here's the beginning of another game. These are fans just walking up the entryway. Here's the first pitch of one of those games. Just standing back. You know, the look on this guy's face. I never interviewed him, but you know, I tweeted that and again got a lot of responses. I mean, it's a pretty cool little shot. These are the ways that guys like me keep sane. You know, you take a picture of bats in the dugout because we have access, right? Fans never get to see anything like this. This doesn't need a caption. Fans never get in a dugout. Well, this is what the bats look like. You know, this is what the Giants, entrance to the Giants dugout looks like, the clubhouse. You tweet this stuff. In Kansas City, this was the crazy tailgate scene. So before the game starts, I'm taking pictures of people in the parking lot, talking about how many people are there, what they're eating. This is the view from the stadium. And then I did a whole section, probably did 6 or 8 tweets on how much they like to party in Kansas City. Nothing but picture after picture after picture of fans tailgating and drinking and bottoms up. Took that out a car window. This is what you're doing while the editor's doing story number 2. And I was talking about tickets that night and how some fans were waiting for the last minute to buy their tickets, hoping for the prices to come down. Well, these are the fans who waited, and right before the game, they're buying their tickets on StubHub, and it jammed. So they're here, the game is starting, and they can't get their tickets. They can't go inside. So a lot of them wound up spending the night outside in the parking lot. But what's the stadium like? Well, had a little time to kill in the game, so I went to the absolute top of the stadium and tweeted this. Put it on Facebook too. It's a sea of blue. Just, that's all I wrote. Need oxygen, top of the stadium. I think the tweet was, sensational view of Interstate 70. Go back here. Back in the parking lot. Some fans who never did get in the game have now pitched tents just to be there. That's the equivalent of, I think the tweet was something like their version of McCovey Cove. This one, this is the first game, and the Giants are killing them. And I was just struck by these 2 fans looking like it was the end of the world. So it's like, I think the line was almost a dust bowl. The look on her face just got me. The scores in the background and all this stuff. So even though we're not doing video at this game, I'm still walking around and I'm still telling the stories. I'm even telling stories about telling the story. This is the locker room. This is what it's like. I think the tweet here was, very difficult to get a soundbite from Pablo Sandoval tonight, popular guy. Okay? So you're telling stories at, what is it, 140 characters at a time? Now, these are all just segments from, you know, various pictures out of that week. On one of the nights when the Royals won, you know, I posted this. I mean, you don't see that. These are a couple of guys out in the outfield. I think the tweet here was last shadows after a long season. This little boy had just been playing catch with a player in the field. So I think the tweet there was, Who doesn't feel like a little kid at the 7th game of a World Series? And then go back to the parade, and this is where this little pocket camera comes in handy. These are fans at the Giants parade. Lady had a sign. I'd been talking to him. I said, "Hey, everybody!" Just held the camera up. Tweeted that. It's another one that got a lot of retweets. So even though it's not video, the point is, you're still telling stories. In my case, I do it with one of these 3 little cameras. Keeps me sane. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. I do Facebook photo essays 2 to 3 times a week. Constantly a feed of pictures on Twitter, engaging with viewers, doing social media. This was the boring part of the lecture, okay? Okay, so when we come back, we'll do more. I got a couple questions here to answer, but let me wait till we come back, and we'll get to John Lee's question when we come back, all right? So that was the digression. That was the stuff you had to do. So now I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty, and this is the stuff that I care most about. I've talked about it all day. Yeah.
Just a quick question about the photos. Like I know you go to these events and everything with the press pass, but do you ask your subjects for any type of release or
No, I don't ask for a release. With the photos, I don't ask for a release. Anywhere that's publicly accessible, we're good. That's just the way it is. I mean, I look at it as photojournalism. I'm not selling them. I'm just putting them online.
I guess I felt I wanted to ask particularly because like you were in like the tent, or it seemed like you were in the tent like in the parking lot at the stadium. And I couldn't tell. I mean, it's public space technically, but the way it's set up, it's almost like half private.
You know what? They knew I was there. I asked if they could take their picture. That's all.
And that's all you need.
If they see the camera, they see me. I say, "Hey, can I get in here?" Yeah. That's permission. That's tacit permission. Let me go to another question here from a friend of mine in Asheville, North Carolina, John Lee. He says, "The fly piece is a classic. What's your advice when it comes to pitching story ideas? Sometimes management doesn't always get what you pitch. How do you overcome it?" John, the answer is, you scratch their back, they'll scratch your back. It's harder and harder to pitch a story I like. My theory is, if a reporter really likes a story that much, management ought to give them the benefit of letting them do it, especially if they don't have a better idea. But now, more and more these days, broadcasts are controlled by producers and management who decide at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. what the newscast is going to be and how it's going to be stacked. And they've basically decided what the news is early in the day, and you have to fulfill those requests. Sometimes I feel less like a reporter and more like a news implementer. But that's just the way it is. They have their vision of what the news should be that day. I'm going to do those 2 packages. So how do you sell it? You take a risk, you build trust, and they trust you a little more the next time, and then they trust you a little more the next time, and they trust you a little more the next time. And then maybe someday you get lucky enough to be where I used to be, where you go in, you pitch 2 words, they say, "Give me 2 minutes." But I don't get to do that very much anymore because we have shorter staffs, we have more news to fill, and they just don't have the luxury of doing it. I think they'd like to let me have that luxury, but it's not there. So the answer to your question is, if you pitch it, especially early on, make it pay, and better yet, if you can be political at it, make them look smart in letting you do that story. If you make them look smart, they're going to love you. And they like it when you make them look smart. You make yourself look smart too. Okay, so the last section here is really about writing and about structure. And people have said to me many times, they ask the question, how do I write more creatively? And I always say to them, it's not about being creative, it's really about being adaptive. I don't like the word creative. I've had many arguments and discussions with people about the word creative in television news. We adapt, we work with, we don't create. It's probably a creative process in its own way, but I prefer the word adapt. I have this theory that news stories have a structural foundation. And there's actually, to write more adaptively, creatively, however you want to say it, I'll tell people very simply, and I've hinted at it already, you change the timeline, you adjust the timeline. We all know what a timeline is right now. We all work in nonlinear. But I have this theory that there are really 3 timelines in every story. And they're crucial in terms of structuring it and making a story interesting. The first timeline is the order in which the events happened. You can't control that. In the second timeline is the order in which you shoot them. The whole thing may have happened at the end of the night. Now you're going to come in at the end of the next morning and start it, and you're basically working backwards. Or maybe you come into an event that has already started, that is undergoing. Well, then you came in the middle. So it's the second timeline is the order in which you shot those events. Both those timelines matter a lot, but the one that matters the most is how you put those events on the timeline that the viewer sees, the presentation timeline. And that's where the writing adaptively or creatively comes in. My theory is you open your story, or in this case stories, because we're doing more than one, on the most effective place on the event timeline. This can be at a beginning, it could be in a middle, it could be an ending. I mean, you saw it already, what I did with the story on the voodoo piece, right? I moved elements around. I just moved it on the timeline. What's going to be your focus? What's going to be your theme? Do you have an idea how you want to start it? Do you have an idea how you want to finish it? What's the most efficient way of getting there? A lot of things to consider. So there are many kinds of structures. Remember I said early on, watch this story. It's a linear structure, the baseball dog story. It's a story that begins at the beginning. Literally, practically the first shot of the day was the first shot we took, and the last shot of the day was the last shot of the story. That's a linear timeline. But there are all kinds of structures. There are reverse structures where you begin at the ending, and then you talk about how you got there. There are bookended structures that might begin and end in the same place, you know, with the story in the middle, like a cream-filled cookie center. Do that too. I'm going to start with one of those bookended structures. This is a story about a guy, and this is, I'll say you now, it's an MMJ story, shot it last year, about a guy that makes wooden sunglasses, okay? Now, a story about a guy in a room making sunglasses is okay, but it doesn't go anywhere. So once again, you come to the question of what's happening? Well, this story actually begins and ends at the end of the day, but I bookended the end of the day with what he was doing in the middle.
There's another one, hurried, hell-bent, all wheels and momentum weaving through the urban maze. Where could Stephen Kilzer possibly be going on a skateboard?
It's a commute.
From here, a small workshop in San Francisco's industrial district, 4 walls and a dream.
The main stuff we make is made out of walnut and cherry.
Sunglasses, handmade wooden sunglasses, sold direct online through a website that Stephen built himself.
You know, that internet site makes you look pretty big.
Oh yeah, definitely. We're way smaller than we look on the internet.
We? Capital Eyewear is him and an occasional part-time employee, a philosophy student named Max with a limited concept of mass production.
How many of these glasses do you make a day?
Well, so far maybe on average like 7.
These sunglasses aren't just an example of a product made in America, but also an attitude. You see, Stephen graduated from college in the fall of 2008. He had a degree in marketing. Just one problem. America was entering the Great Recession. No one would hire him.
I just got sick of waiting. I get sick of waiting for other people to decide like what was going to happen for me.
Stephen finally figured that if no one would hire him to market an item, he would have to invent one and then hire himself. But for a guy with rudimentary woodworking skills, that took a while.
I just didn't know that you couldn't do it, so I just kept doing it.
See this box in a corner of the room? Discards. He took the plunge and bought a laser cutter. That was $8,000. But now the basic frames come out like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, 4 at a time. Then add the hours of grinding, shaping, sanding, plus the search for new material. Stephen plans to make more glasses out of this 2,000-year-old piece of redwood from an old railroad bridge. Bottom line, Stephen Kilzer is so dedicated to his young business that he spends a lot of nights upstairs in a small apartment with only a hot plate and an alley for a view. But he never whines.
I've seen people in startups or whatever who want to still have their weekends and still work, you know, like a 9 to 5. And I've just kind of looked at it like, it's like a luxury, you know, to get to work for yourself.
So sometimes, you see, made in America means making yourself in America. It's lots of work, lots of worry, and a character-building reality check for a college grad who couldn't get a job, at least then.
The irony is now, could you get a marketing job somewhere else?
I think so. I don't know. I mean,
would you want to?
No, no way.
Not at all, because Stephen Kilzer still needs to get that next shipment off his skateboard and into the post office. From San Francisco, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
So you see how we started the story by posing a question. Where's he going on a skateboard? Now, did I plan it that way? No. I said, that whole thing came about because as we're doing the story, and I don't know how I'm going to open it, and I don't know how I'm going to end it, I saw the skateboard in the corner. And I said, you're not one of those guys, are you? He goes, yeah. He says, I don't get to write it much anymore. I said, where do you go? He says, usually to the post office. And I'm late. I said, really, you going to go today? He goes, yeah. So I stuck around. The last thing I shot was him leaving the place. Then I drove to the post office and waited for him to arrive. Buttoned the whole story about that. So that's a bookend. Does it make sense? It gives you a reason to hang around, and it rewards you for hanging around. Now, what I've shown you today is something, so far, a lot of stories. Have you noticed how every one of those stories has a distinct beginning? Have you noticed that? I rate these links. I'm always going to show this little section of stuff here. I call them scene sets. Now, some of them are elaborate. Some of them are not so elaborate. The beginning of him on the skateboard was semi-elaborate. If it's a hard news story, like a guy fixing the drought, it's, he's going out and he's digging a well, that's the scene set, okay? But I want to give you the idea that you open a story by getting the viewer's attention. It's kind of like a magician. He begins the act with a little patter. You don't start a joke by telling the punchline. You got to get them interested first. You got to hook them. You got to keep them around. You set a scene. You set up the story. Not just with the anchor lead in, but with what you say to do. You can do it visually. You can do it intellectually. Maybe you do it both. But I've got about 4 minutes here of nothing but the beginnings of stories. One after another, after another, after another. You're going to recognize the technique because now you're going to see them one after another. But you're also going to realize that I've been doing this all day in every piece. Some long, some short.
It is a subtle thing. You can't touch it or feel it, but during the night, the phone company drew a line.
Hi there. We're doing an informal telephone poll. Can you help us for a minute, please?
Okay.
What do you think of this new 510 area code?
I don't know exactly, but I don't have telephone.
Here's the affected area. All of the East Bay that used to be 415 has now become 510.
Shama Shumney had a bad feeling yesterday morning. It began with word of a helicopter crash in Iraq, and then the worst of her worries came true.
Yesterday afternoon, 2 Marines came to the house.
And as long as it took for a much larger chunk of sandstone than this to tumble 80 feet, the apartment cliff dwellers of Pacifica changed status this morning, from residents to refugees.
Well, I thought we would have to move sooner or later.
It isn't quite panic, but all along the Tuolumne River near Modesto, people have been moving fast, trying to stay ahead of what may become record-rising water. Did you get everything out?
No, not even close. Got my daughter's stuff, that's all. Just my daughter's stuff. But that's all that I need.
By tomorrow morning, they may need a new place to live. The Del Rio Mobile Home Park now sits precariously close to a river which used to be a road which never looked like whitewater before. If New York is the city that never sleeps, then these days it also remains ever vigilant and intensifies the closer a person gets to ground zero. It's a place of police and bomb-sniffing dogs, especially today in the midst of a new terrorist threat. Ride a train, strangers talk about it.
I mean, you can't stop living your life because the terror threat happens, right?
You're looking at one of the best times in life. The innocence of youth, the passion of an organized sport like BMX racing.
You like this, huh, Luke?
Yeah.
Likes it? He loves it more than anything else in life, which is really quite revealing about 7-year-old Luke O'More, because 24 hours earlier,
Oh no.
he was actively fighting for that life, awaiting 2 big chemotherapy injections in a different kind of battle.
Leukemia.
It came about all of a sudden. We were on vacation.
You've been there, you live this. It's 1997, and as we all know, the battle continues between patience and time. Which can we have less of? So let's pick time.
Excuse me, do you have a second?
No, sorry.
Excuse me, do you have a second? Not really, not right now. You don't have a second, do you?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Actually, they do, because tonight, planet Earth observes something very different. It's called leap second, not leap day, leap second. Instead of 1 day, it's just 1 extra second tacked on at midnight. We're doing this, you see, to keep up with, or in this case, slow down with the cosmos.
Far out. That's cool.
The first thing you may notice about Madonna's new book, it looks kind of like an Eskimo pie. Unlike the pie, however, you may experience some difficulties in opening the package. But with perseverance and by using the appropriate tools, you will get to the goodies inside eventually.
He's a creature of the night, a man who seeks an ideal in some of the darkest, most unlikely conditions.
You know, middle of the night, early night, late night, early morning, it's all good.
And that is why Stephen Christensen crawled onto a ledge near San Francisco's Cliff House recently. He was armed with only a small camera. His target? A giant one.
I always get people coming up to me and say, "What are you doing? It's dark. What are you taking a picture of?"
Stuff like this, Pigeon Point Lighthouse on the California coast. We have been told there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but on this day, Dr. Dan Fernandez is going to great lengths and heights above Big Sur in pursuit of something even more elusive.
It's water that's airborne.
In a word, fog, wispy, capricious, mysterious, mesmerizing, and right about now, so far, far below.
There's water in the fog.
How much?
In a cubic meter, you might have about a gram.
Doesn't sound like a lot.
Doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot of cubic meters of fog out there.
Every day is Memorial Day at the Sacramento Valley National Cemetery. A giant flag presides over a steady procession of final farewells for American veterans, young and old. Men like Master Sergeant George Mello of Vacaville.
He passed away on our 67th anniversary, bless his heart. Yeah, he waited till that day, and it just made it straight 67.
Judging by the turnout, Master Sergeant Mello lived a very good life. When it finally ended, our nation gave him a fine funeral. 21 guns. And then, in contrast, Sergeant Eric Seiler.
Taps is 25 notes.
These little mechanisms guide our lives. They influence where we go, who we see, how long we stay, how much we pay. You'll find these mechanisms in the parking meters of San Francisco.
We presently, at this moment, have 19,705 meters out in the field.
Ben Beckman, Superintendent of Parking Meters.
This is Duncan, and this is POM.
POM stands for?
Parkometer.
What does Duncan stand for?
Just Duncan. It's just a name like anything else would be.
I'm going to make this really simple for you. That's more clips than I wanted to show, but it's the one I found. It's the one MPEG Stream Clip would play. Okay, there's a real simple formula on scene sets. Every one of those. Did you see the pattern? It's a tease and it's a reveal. A tease and a reveal. I'm thinking about it. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to get you interested. You might be thinking it's going this way, but no, it's something else. Every one of them. A tease and a reveal. Just real simple way to start a story. And you can do it without burying the lead. Now look, there are going to be times when you don't do one of these things. I don't want to know about a scene set if that asteroid is heading to the Earth. Just get me right to it. It's coming down. It will land on Tuesday. Sometimes you get right to the point. But most of the time, a little tease and a little reveal. It might be 10 seconds, might be 5 seconds, might be one line is going to do, and it's going to do enough to give you a scene set and get you going. Okay. Narrative stories. The very word narrative implies a relationship between you and the viewer. And this is really crucial. And that means the language that we use. There's a relationship. They talk, you listen. A lot of reporters say to me, I don't like the way I sound on television. And I didn't like the way I sounded on television. Now I don't listen to myself anymore. I can't stand it, but that's another subject. Because my voice has gotten so old and raspy, people think I'm a smoker. I'm not, I'm just old. But they say they don't like the way they sound on television. And I say, you know what? It's not the way you sound, it's the way you write. How can you sound natural if you don't write naturally? If you write convoluted sentences, there's no way you're going to like the way you sound. If you don't like the way you sound, look first at the way you speak. Good writing is going to make a horrible piece palatable. And on the other hand, it may make a good piece horrible. Writing can kill a piece, writing can make a piece. Writing is crucial. So if you don't like the way you sound, look at the way you write. And there are, I got to go through this list. I've done it, it's in the book, but I got to go through it because these are pet peeves. First of all, this spate of ing verbs that we're hearing on national news these days makes me crazy. The president talking about what he did yesterday, the president leaving the building, even if it's yesterday. It's like they're afraid to use past tense. They're afraid to use a nondescriptive verb. The president spoke yesterday. Yeah, it happened yesterday. But they never say, the president spoke yesterday. They say, the president speaking yesterday. But we don't talk like that. Okay? We don't talk like that. It's hackneyed. It's artificial. It's a trend. It's going away. Don't adapt it, and don't take it as the Bible. It's got to go away. Please, God, let it go away. You ever seen books flying off shelves? Do they have wings? When an agency beefs up security, do they hire cows? Emergency crews race to the scene? Does one of them get a checkered flag? I mean, we use these phrases all the time. When you come home for dinner, does your wife greet you at the door and say, next up, the pot roast? And if she burns it, did something go horribly wrong? This is the way we talk in television news. I don't know why. Somebody told us it's all right. It's not all right. Hopefully, I used to be a really fancy writer. Hopefully now you don't even notice the words very much at all. They just advance the story. The story, again, invisible writing, invisible cutting, invisible editing. They stay out of the way. You got to connect with your viewers. You got to write from point to point. You got to use a little nat sound to kick off, but not so much nat sound that it interrupts, as we talked about before. You got to remember that when you're writing for television, you're different than in any other medium. There's a certain baseball announcer, a national baseball announcer, who makes me crazy. Makes a lot of Americans crazy. The reason he makes me crazy is that he's telling me exactly what I'm seeing. I don't need to know exactly what I'm seeing it. I want to know about what I'm seeing. The same thing applies to television news. You writing to pictures, yes, but writing to pictures doesn't mean you're telling me what we're seeing. You tell me about what we're seeing. Make sense? So you connect stuff. You write in parallel with pictures. You write to set up and deliver to sound, which either completes a thought or begins the new one. You don't do Benihana editing. I mean, more on Benihana editing. Have you been on trains? Everybody in this room been on a train? Been at home? Okay. Okay, as you're going down, you know the difference between really good tracks and really bad tracks. The really bad tracks, you feel every rail, right? You know you're on a train. The really good tracks feels like one rail, right? You want to write a smooth track. You don't want to notice the connections between the sound, the pictures, the track, the narration. You want it all to be seamless. It's all got to blend together. Sometimes you words, sometimes you play off of words. The piece I'm going to show you now is another MMJ story. I did it a couple of months ago. I mean, it's interesting about how do you find stories, somebody asked earlier, and how do you pick stories? I found this last February on a lunch break in St. Helena. I saw this thing and I said, what the heck is this? Walked in the door. As soon as the guy opened his mouth, I knew I had a story. Came back, told the desk about it. I didn't get back to shoot this piece until July. But it's a pretty good narrative. It's got a different kind of structure. Everything here connects. You're not going to really notice the writing. You may notice the fact that I used 3 different cameras in this story. I had one on the roof, one mounted to a car in the parking lot, and one on my shoulder. And if you look carefully in some of the story, you'll see a certain reporter scurrying around with the camera on his shoulder. This is one of the more bizarre things I've ever seen in my life. But again, the writing doesn't get in the way. There's nothing fancy here. The tracks connect. Tracks go into sound. Sound goes into tracks. We don't tell you what we're seeing. We tell you about what we're seeing.
St. Helena in the Napa Valley, a quaint, small-town wine country escape, but not always quiet. It's also a place with the most unusual tourist attraction.
Is it gonna go? Yeah, it's gonna go.
All in good time, but there's a story behind this. His name is Mike Neiman.
You like the pink one? No.
Along with wife Jody, they're best known for running a motorcycle rental shop right in the middle of town. It's hard to miss the place based on the signage and what has become their word-of-mouth side business.
And they're takers?
They're takers.
Intake cap pipes.
For a mere $100, Mike will fire up his pride and joy, this Pratt & Whitney radial aircraft engine from a B-36 bomber.
The smell is unbelievable.
Yeah, it smells like fuel.
It smells like victory.
This is the B-36.
Back in the Cold War in the 1950s, the B-36 was a 10-engine behemoth that could fly to Russia and back. They called it the Peacemaker because it carried 86,000 pounds of bombs.
And for the Sunday punch,
Mike does not limit his affection for airplane engines to just one. He has a collection of them, all visible from the wine train as it rolls past his backyard every day. He rescued most of them from towers around the valley. He likes working on them too, piece by mysterious piece.
How did you learn all this stuff, Mike?
Google. Where else?
The passion goes back to his youth, growing up in the valley. Mike has fond memories of cold mornings and hearing the Napa Valley humming to the sound of those engines driving away the frost. It would appear that Mike never got enough.
Anybody who lives here can tell you it just sounded like a fleet of aircraft flying. It was just full throttle all the time, just wide open.
So maybe it's only natural that when Mike had an opportunity to buy the big one from a collector for $16,000, he just couldn't resist.
At $100 a pop, is it a moneymaker yet?
Well, he hasn't paid for the engine yet, if that's what you mean.
In a small town like St. Helena, word spreads fast when Mike starts his checklist. At the consignment store next door, Christine Waldenberg has it down to a routine.
All we do is bring the clothes in from the street, and we're fine.
So, it must be time. It's only natural to jump back when that Pratt & Whitney ignites. Here it is from a safer distance on Christine's roof. Those are 28 pistons, 56 spark plugs, 4,300 horses right there. A spectacle of deafening, pure power, vibrating windows, rattling innards. In a small town where neighbors complain about leaf blowers, yes, people do get excited about this. We sure know Mike does. When he fires his engine, visitors say they just can't get enough, down to the last sputtering gasp.
Thank you.
Take a bow, Mike Neiman. You earned it. In St. Helena, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
That took forever. Management's going, well, why do we want to see a guy start an engine in his front yard? I'm going, why wouldn't you want to see a guy start his engine in the front yard? And a lot of people would think it'd be a one-trick pony. Okay, start the engine. But there's all this stuff leading up to it, right? So this is really a story about, I mean, it's got a payoff, but it's really about all the lead up. And then it's also about why he did it. You got to ask why. And then you find out the little backstory about him growing up in the valley and how the sound of those engines makes him think of his youth. And all of a sudden, it kind of makes more sense. So I went there and I just shot the heck out of that story. I think I used a DSLR in that section of him in his office as well when he was banging that stuff around. So let me ask you a little bit about interviewing. Talk about interviewing. Interviews are crucial. Have you noticed the kind of questions I ask in stories? I don't ask factual questions. Usually I ask emotional questions. I don't use factual sound bites very often. I use sound bites that elaborate or enhance on whatever people are talking about. They amplify emotions. They work the best. I mean, there are times when a factual soundbite is going to work. You know, in World War II, when FDR, declared, "Today the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Today they attacked the Philippines." That's strong. That's dramatic. When a soundbite and a factual soundbite is more dramatic than you can present it yourself, then by all means use it. But a lot of times, I'm going to use the bite that enhances it. Usually, I can say it faster than they can say it, and more clearly and more concisely. Sometimes interviews get a little weird. I mean, you may not get good stuff. Like I talked about with the guy with the elephant. Remember the elephant trainer? I finally got him into a safety zone where he felt comfortable, and he tells me about he has stage fright, and all of a sudden he talks his brains out. That's good. The piece I'm going to show you here is a different kind of use of interviews. This is an interview where we use basically the answers to questions as surprises. It's an interesting interview in its own right, because the kid wasn't all that good. I've shown the story for years. But he's compelling, and his father's compelling. And in talking to his mother, the story turns. And she says it in such a way that it happens. But mostly, I want you to notice that these aren't so much interview questions as a conversation. My questions of him are as important as his answers. My questions, his answers, they lead us to where we want to go in this story. Got to get it? Hang on. Pray to the gods of MPEG stream clip. We have it. And you'll see a scene set in this one too, by the way.
If you ever visit the neighborhood around Figueroa Drive in San Leandro, you'll notice the lawns. They're neat and trimmed at house after house. Clearly, someone had a hand in this. But who?
Me.
Also known as Zach Lanza, who's only 8 years old, but has the work ethic of someone much older.
My mom and dad always say, "You're gonna bust your back before you're 40.
What do you say?
I don't care.
The kid says his dad always had a way with tools.
What happened here?
What happened? I don't know.
I don't know, it's just the way I was born. My first word was tool.
Zach already has his own toolbox, his own stash, and his own set of values.
If you could have a toy truck or a power drill, you would take?
The power drill.
This is really a story about aptitude, and early on, Zach figured out his. His mom and dad tell about the time when they needed a little peace and quiet, so they set him up in the garage with a piece of wood and some screws and a screwdriver, like this. They figured he'd stay out of trouble.
But boys will be boys. Before long, Zach unscrewed the sliding lock, took off the door lock, then the doorknob, and finally the door.
We found reverse.
It would appear that with tools or anything mechanical, Zach Lanza is a borderline genius, but the twist to this story is that it's come with a price.
Even in preschool, Zach was off by himself. He wasn't playing with the other kids.
Ask Zach about being a kid with severe dyslexia.
Yeah, it's hard for them to read, write, and spell and all that kind of stuff.
But it doesn't sap their willpower. From mowing lawns this summer, this 8-year-old kid has already made more than $100, enough to buy this mower and save a little money too.
What's he got?
What's he got? He's got a bankroll. I've had to take a loan from him before.
He's lucky he found something that makes him feel good about himself, that he can do every day and feel successful.
If the grass appears greener on the other side, whoever's looking has not factored in fortune or perseverance. We are what we are and we deal with it. If we're lucky, we figure it all out by the time we're 8.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you, too. Wish I had a lawn, you could mow it.
I wish you did.
In San Leandro, Wayne Freedman, ABC 7 News.
Cute little kid. You see how the dialogue questions work? Plain old sound bites weren't going to work in that story. And the reveal was when she talks about the dyslexia, turns it around. And that's sort of like where you let the viewer make their own discoveries. You don't tell them, the viewers paying attention, they get it on their own. Got a question here from Bob in New York. What are the biggest mistakes you see in young photographers? I don't know if any mistake is the biggest, there are just a lot of them. Well, let's see. Too much discipline, in some cases, where they won't go off the tripod. Too little discipline, where they won't go on the tripod. They don't use lights, and they need to. Or they do use lights, and they just use a sun gun. Photographers who don't shoot sequences, who forget to get the wide shot first, always get the wide shot. They don't get enough detail shots so they can cut those sequences. They lose perspective on the moment. I had once had a photographer who turned the camera off because in the crucial moment in a story, the shot was slightly out of focus, so he didn't want me to use it. I don't care. I mean, you got to recognize the moment. The biggest mistake, I think, of all of them, is a guy who's a button pusher, who's not aware of the story and what's happening at that moment. Who shoots, they need a person to shoot for context, shoot for story, shoot for moments, shoot for pretty pictures when you have time to get them, but a person who gets the story first. I mean, look, when I started working in this business, everything had to be locked down, everything had to be perfectly color balanced, everything had to be absolutely perfection. Nowadays with YouTube, sort of like the dirtier a shot is sometimes, the more credibility it has. I mean, I've got a theory on stories that I always leave an imperfect shot in there. It might be just a little camera jiggle or a little move or a little something, just to keep it a little bit fresh. You can't, if it's too perfect, it's imperfect. So leave in the imperfections. But generally, I mean, a photographer who's young, the mistakes they make, I'd say, keep to your discipline, keep the story in mind, take care of the reporter, take care of the story. Do not inject yourself and your work into the piece with all those fast cuts, those tight shots, and the stuff that doesn't work. Again, it's this invisible theory. Your work should be seen and appreciated, but not necessarily, we shouldn't be conscious of it. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Maturity, for lack of a better word. And use some nice lights once in a while, when you can. But never ruin the spontaneity. That's the key. I'm almost done here. I talk a lot about these things called simple truths. And they're really crucial. Simple truths are where you write the words that that maybe the viewer is aware of, but they lead him to the door and they allow him to walk in. Simple truths are kind of the essence of what we do, in that they deliver the message. I mean, here's one. In Oakland, they're noting the year's 90th homicide victim more for his number than his name. Okay, that was an observation I made to a photographer as we're sitting there for 4 hours waiting for them to move a body. I said to him, you know, nobody cares about this guy. We're just here because he's number 90. Well, that turned into a very good line in a story. A guy named Greg Lyne once did a story about troubles in the docks in Northern California. It was years ago. He had a photographer named Lou Diaria who was shooting. Lou had this great shot. He says, you got to write a line for this shot. And Greg went nuts for about 20 or 30 minutes. They were cutting overnight. It was a picture of a bird pecking at food between the dock, trying to get a piece of food. Couldn't get it. Wouldn't give up. Greg wrote, the living is where they find it. Steve Hartman at CBS, in a story about the Grand National Rodeo, wrote of an overmatched cowboy needing the ride of his life the 4th night in a row. Brilliant line. So, and on and on and on. I mean, he did a story once on the world's newest, oldest human. He was the new oldest guy. Somebody else had died. So we went to visit him. And I'm thinking it's like the guy's got nothing to say. He's in a tiny little room. He's got nothing left. I'm in the car going back, and I say, you know, this is one of those titles I don't think I ever want to achieve in life, which became a line. There are some titles for which we work, others for which we aspire, and sometimes titles find us. For Chris Mortensen of San Rafael, the last of those three has happened, although at 115 years old, titles don't impress him much anymore. All simple truths. I was covering the tsunami a couple of years ago down there in Santa Cruz. Looked at the harbor, boats everywhere, a jigsaw puzzle of boats pieces. John Hart of NBC News writing about illegal immigrants crossing the border, describing it as trying to stop pebbles in an avalanche. Those are all really good, simple truth lines. You don't necessarily call attention to themselves, but they bring attention to feelings. So, you know, the thing about television news is that when viewers criticize us, one of their big criticisms is we're telling them how to feel. It's like I watch the morning news, it's like the fascinating story, the shocking this, the whatever that, the gruesome, you know, I don't want to know how to feel. I'll make that decision for myself. But I don't mind a little help once in a while. Simple truths are often so obvious that we miss them. They really do illuminate those stories of life and the stories of the news. They're kind of, you take a step back and then you come back in. This thing I'm going to show you next. Should I show this, Daryl? Freeze dry. This was a bizarre story. We did not get what we expected to get on this piece. But you know, when they send us to do a story, we're going to do a story. So you're going to get the simple truth at the end of this piece, and you're going to go through a whole range of stuff in the process of watching it. Pray to the gods of MPEG Stream Clip.
Hi, Beastie.
She's all dog. Beast may be the most well-behaved toy poodle on the planet. She does not chew furniture or mess on the bed or demand to be walked.
She's an angel. She's very, very quiet. Doesn't bark much.
In short, she's perfect. Maybe too perfect.
Actually, you may have noticed by now that although Beast gets around quite a bit, she doesn't move much. There's a reason.
She is freeze-dried.
Freeze-dried?
Freeze-dried.
Same as instant coffee, permanently preserved, just as Pam Kiefer remembers her.
Did you settle on that particular pose?
Yes, we did.
You could have had her standing up or sitting down or...
Right, or her mouth open with her tongue hanging out or smiling or whatever. But this was when, because our intentions were to put her under the coffee table and looking up at us like she always did.
And as from time to time she still does. Beast died unexpectedly of heart problems in August of 1997, only 5 days after having this prize-winning portrait taken. She'd been a member of the family for 12 years.
Was this a normal dog?
No, she didn't know she was a dog.
What'd she think she was?
Person.
A mere technicality, but because she wasn't a person, the usual rules about disposal didn't apply. The procedure cost $500. By freeze-drying her dog, Pam says it's almost as if Beast is still around.
The neatest thing that I didn't know is that she still smells just like her.
Now, maybe it all sounds weird, but not by Pam's standards. This is a woman who tends the artificial flowers in her garden as if they were real. A woman who's used the dog as a decorating motif. Beast is everywhere.
She barks whenever I open a program.
We haven't gone to extremes here, have we?
No.
It is both amusing and sad.
Oh.
Yes, people do grieve this way for lost pets. Pam never had kids. She says remembering the love of Beast remains primary, that Beast was a dog secondary.
And there's water in there, yes. I still fill my water bowl.
Of course she does. If you don't understand, you never will. And Pam Kiefer wouldn't care anyway, because sometimes, even in death, a pet provides comfort.
You're not going to get another dog?
No. There'll never be another Beast. And I have a dog.
In Tracy, Wayne Freedman, Channel 7 News.
What was the simple truth line in that story? What was it? There were a bunch of them. But the best one was, even in death, a pet provides comfort. I mean, you can't go through the story. I mean, you go through a range of emotions in this story, don't you? At the beginning, you want to laugh. Yeah. Then you're beginning to think she's crazy. then you know she might be crazy. But at the end of the story, do you feel for her? The writing turned all of that. It's the acknowledgement in the writing that this is an uncomfortable situation. It's okay. And then you come up with a line that even in death, a pet provides comfort. And it sort of all makes sense, at least for her. So we got a lot of calls after that story. Everybody wanted to know how they could freeze dry their dog. Never underestimate. Bill Perry in Oklahoma. Wayne has, well, okay. Can I talk about how I communicate with my shooter and how to achieve it? When I'm not shooting it myself, depends on who I'm shooting it with. I'll see stuff and ask them to shoot it. Sometimes I'll trust them to shoot stuff and that'll bring stuff to me that we'll work with. It all depends, but I'm seeing stuff all the time. It's not 2 sets of eyes, it's 4 sets of eyes. It's not 2 sets of ears, it's 4 sets of ears. If there's a question I didn't ask, I want to know it from the photographer. If there's something he sees or something part of the story that he gets that I didn't see, I want to hear about it. So it's not my story, it's not his or her story, it's our story. Pictures, sound, script, you know, they exist somewhere in here. It's kind of like a marriage. So if you establish that kind of a relationship, that it's a mutual process, that it's something between the two of you, that you're putting it all together, you may be able to get some better results. A lot of times they see me walking around the room snapping photographs and they figure I'm probably going to want that in the story and they shoot it anyway. So sometimes I kind of ask them what to shoot by just taking pictures of stuff and they see it. I try to stay out of their way. But that's how you do it. You get a sense of what the story is before you get there. If it changes, you see it. If you see something you might find interesting, you say, that could be a really good opening sequence shot. Or why don't we do an opening sequence with this? I don't say shoot this wide, tight, medium anymore. I don't do that. I say, can you give me an opening sequence of whatever? I'm going to give you a line that goes something like this. And they'll shoot it. But I've been at the station since 1991. They know me. Some of them know me too well. And then sometimes you just got a guy who wants to get through the day and then you don't communicate at all. You just get what you get and move on. Some days we work so hard and so fast that frankly, I don't see a lick of video before it leaves the truck. I'm too busy working on the next story. Just have to trust that it's there. Our guys are really good at getting it on, getting it fast, and getting it clean, and usually getting it right. That doesn't mean they're going to make it beautiful, but they're going to get it on and get it done. And sometimes that's all you can ask in a story. Daryl, should I show the whale? Okay. Last story. I close a lot of seminars with this. You'll never forget it. This story, at the time, reprised a story done by another crew 25 years earlier. And that is close to 40 years ago now. You've probably seen this video before. In terms of structure, this is a story done in chapters. I guess it's a classic bookend in that it begins in the present, then it tells what happened in the past in a linear fashion, then it finishes again in the present. I'm not going to tell you any more about it. Crank the volume on this at times. It's really just a one-trick pony, but it's very elaborate.
It happened here on a gray, storm-swept beach near Florence, Oregon, a place where the tides and shifting sands hide many secrets, but not all of them.
After all these years, it's amazing that this thing has come back to life again. But every once in a while, it pops up.
It's an aroma that still lingers. It was one of the worst smells I've ever encountered.
Words cannot describe the smell. It was in my nostrils for a solid week.
And for television news reporter Paul Lindman, it's the story that will not go away, one through which he will remain 24 years old forever.
It had to be said, the Oregon State Highway Division not only had a whale of a problem on its hands, it had a stinking whale of a problem.
I'm a little tired of the whale.
In November 1970, a 45-foot-long sperm whale died at sea and washed ashore on that very same beach near Florence. For more than a week, the 8 tons of carcass remained there, rotting, while the locals tried to figure out what to do with it.
They did face just one minor problem at the time. You see, it had been so long since a whale washed ashore in these parts that nobody could remember how to get rid of one. It was too big to bury, it stunk too much to cut into little pieces, and burning it was out of the question. So, in its ultimate wisdom, the Oregon Department of Highways, which had jurisdiction over this beach, decided to blow the thing up, to use dynamite.
It seemed to be the best idea at the time, at least to Highway Department engineer George Thornton. As he told Lindman on that fateful day, dynamite had solved plenty of problems in the past, and he had a strategy.
Well, I'm confident that it'll work. The only thing is we're not sure just exactly how much explosives it'll take to disintegrate this thing so the scavengers, seagulls and crabs and whatnot can clean it up.
Thornton settled on 20 cases just to be on the safe side. His crews dug holes, placing the dynamite to blow the whale bits out to sea. As they went about their business, more than 100 people turned out to watch.
Oh, yeah. There were picnics, there were entire families. This is going to be fun. Let's go see the whale.
Only one man expressed concern.
I'm thinking we got big trouble here. 20 cases of dynamite.
Walter Umenhofer had come upon the scene by accident. He'd been looking for property that day, but since he'd worked with dynamite and sand in the military, Umenhofer warned Thornton, who didn't take him very seriously.
This guy says, anyhow, he says, I'm going to have everybody up there on the top of those dunes, far away. And I says, yeah, and I'm going to be the furthest SOB down that way.
According to most accounts, NASA has launched rockets with less fanfare.
They made a big spectacle of waving their hats, their hard hats in the air, and clear everybody away and all this, all clear.
The flag drops, the thing goes off.
And they touched that sucker off, and let me tell you, that thing went up, and it was the biggest mushroom cloud you ever seen, and it was red and white and black, and it was nothing but guts and blood and gunk.
Carried by a wind, the cloud moved inland.
So everybody all of a sudden start realizing that, oh my God, here it comes in this mist.
We were covered, we were permeated with redness and the smell.
That would be the least of their problems. Those who witnessed the explosion agree that the next few moments seemed to last forever. Individual descriptions vary, but it soon became apparent that what should have been little pieces of whale turned out to be big ones.
And this stuff starts hitting the ground. Boom, 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 boom. And all of a sudden you realize, my God, I could be killed by whale blubber here.
And I'm watching this one piece. There's a big piece up there, and it's kind of flubbering and floating around.
And we ran. We literally ran.
And it just absolutely stopped. And it came flat down. And kapow!
Right on top of Walter Umenhofer's 1969 Oldsmobile.
It was a neat car. I just got it from Dunham's, and it was a Regency. And like I say, the funny thing about their slogan was a whale of a deal. Well, I got a hell of a whale of a deal.
Within 2 days, the state of Oregon wrote Walter Umenhofer a check for the full retail value of his car.
Public Affairs, this is Ed. Hello.
25 years later, a description of the whale event found its way onto the internet. Some of the readers get angry, and then they call Ed Shopes at Oregon's Department of Transportation.
They think it just happened.
But despite all attempts by those involved, curiosity about the exploding whale remains as overwhelming as the carcass. 25 years later, Paul Lindman still works at Channel 2 in Portland, along with Doug Brazil, the photographer who filmed the original event.
It's just one thing after another here.
Every few days, they get another request to see the footage.
We have the Jeopardy show is interested.
And everybody who contacts me says the same thing. I need to see that video. The Atomic Energy Commission, we work, of course, with explosive devices. We need this for training purposes.
What do they really want?
They just want to see the whale blown up.
Finally, you may be wondering whatever happened to the man who underestimated the strength of whale blubber, George Thornton.
Is there any chance it might be more than a one-day job?
If there's any large chunks left.
Well, he declined to be interviewed for this story, but in his official written report back in 1970, he declared the operation a success, more or less, which helps to explain what happened to his career 6 months later.
He got promoted.
It's the old hold back a fact ending. The real lesson in that story is, it's not in the structure, it's in the idea that you want to end and finish strong. So that's my ending. You'll always remember that story, I think. You've had enough of me anyway. I mean, I've been up here for 2.5 hours. Happy to take more questions from anybody. I got one here from Ryan in Atlanta. Where do you pull from all those lines? Are you reading all those lines? I don't know if I'm not sure what you mean by that. Do you mean, am I reading when I say them, or am I reading when I'm pulling them out of here? I write it, and then I do the track. Now, and maybe the question is, how do I track? And the answer is, when I'm reading a track, yeah, I'm looking at the script, and I know what the words are, but I'm saying it, I'm not reading it. Okay? I'm trying to be conversational. I'll speed it up, I'll slow it down. I'm going to talk to the viewer in the very same way I be talking to you now. Maybe a little different in terms of tone, but even with that microphone, the microphone's right here. I don't shout at it over here. That microphone is right here. You know, it's like a 12-cylinder engine. You don't have to shout. You've got more range when the microphone is right here. You guys got any more questions? No?
So what is some advice for someone who is just beginning to get into the, learn how to write a story? Like, all this seems very complex to me.
Seems complex to you?
Professor Schechner would say, keep it simple.
No, it is simple. Start simple, and then once you master simple, you do a little more, and you do a little more, and you build on it. Yeah, start simple first. That's the best thing you can do. And then once you get simple, you can get a little more complicated and a little more complicated. You never want to lose a sense of flow. I mean, I learned how to edit and cut stories, and oftentimes rewrite stories working on tape, linear, where it was one take. There was no go back and fix it. And I mean, I had a skill at one point where I could change the line. I didn't like a line, didn't like a track. The piece is already cut. I would go back in there, and I had 8 seconds and 3 frames. I could read the new line in 8 seconds and 3 frames and still hit the cut points. I had that little time clock in my head. So I learned to edit and cut, and in cases right on the fly, by watching these pieces building and getting a sense for how they flowed. Now we do that afterwards. So for you, you just got to get a sense of it. You need to watch a lot of stuff, look at different styles. There's a guy named Ben Aaron in New York City who works at WNBC. He's completely unorthodox. You'd think I wouldn't like his style. I love his style. I mean, Ben does a stand-up probably every 3 or 4 sentences. But he's a columnist doing social commentary. He's very good. Look up Ben Aaron, WNBC. He's very cutting edge, very refreshing. You know, I'm the opposite. I'm old school. I'm narrative. But, you know, viewers respond to both. The bottom line is communicate with the viewer, whether it's complicated or not complicated. I don't know if that answers your question. Keep it simple. Keep your first stories at a minute. Learn the basics, and then learn to elaborate. Anybody else? Any more questions online? Okay. Going once, going twice. Thank you very much. It was fun.
Thank you, and I just want to say one more thing before we leave, and that is, if any of you are interested in becoming a member of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, what you can do is go online. Our regional chapter here, San Francisco, Northern California, we are EmmySF.TV, EMMYSF.TV. For those of you out there in Cyberland, thank you for sticking with us all this time. If you would like to become a member and you're not, you can go onto our national site, emmyonline.tv/chapters, and there you will find your regional chapter and how you can join your regional chapter. So again, thank you to all of you for spending your Saturday with us, and thank you for all of you around the country watching us online. We're really happy to have you, and I hope you learned a lot from Wayne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.